this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order. The next regular Board of Education meeting will be Tuesday, November 10th at 7:30 p.m. in the board meeting room. Thank you, everyone. It's good to see everybody again. I will say, as we all heard from the first selectman, we are aware that COVID cases in town are rising. I'd like to thank the administration for their fast action last week, and also for their the community in understanding the need to be nimble. I do think that our ability to do accurate contract tracing and get our kids back in school as fast as possible is a credit both to the administration and this community. With that, I have heard from some people both sides of this issue, and what I would like to ask as a community, remember there is no stigma in being ill. Please come forward. We consider it helpful to the public health crisis. It is helpful if you come forward. Similarly, if people can refrain from rumor, innuendo, especially dealing with children, there's a lot of pressure around facts like that. We thank the families who have quarantined their children, even if it is just to be the safest of the safe for other children. But I would ask the public to refrain from spreading things unless they know it for a fact. Better to ask a question than to make an assumption, because I think everyone here is trying to do their best, and there are children behind this, and we want everyone to feel comfortable in coming forward, and that is how we get through this. My tagline has always been, we get through this when we get through it together, and the more we can continue that, the better. But I do thank the community of Darien. I think all of us, including the board, got the phone call early in the morning with the high school closure. I think it was in the best interest of our children's health and safety. And so I'm sure we'll have some questions on that tonight. I think that the administration has demonstrated that they will take public health and safety of utmost importance. So with that, we'll move on to the meeting, and I will open it up for public comment.
Good evening. If you would like to speak during public comment, please click the participants icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Next, click the raised hand option. You will notice a blue hand icon appear in the upper corner of your screen where your face, name, and/or number appears. When it is your turn to speak, the facilitator will identify you and announce that you are unmuted for public comment. Once recognized and unmuted, please state your name and address. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment. Jonathan Dunn, you are unmuted.
Good evening. My name is Jonathan Dunn, and I live at 175 Raymond Street. Tonight, I would just like to speak briefly on the safe, full reopening of our schools and to commend everyone involved over the last month. My daughter is a kindergartner at Tokenique. Simply said, the difference in her learning and engagement during a month of in-person learning compared to a month of hybrid learning is astonishing. Every day she comes home happy, telling us all about the activities at school and what she learned that day. She's excited for the next day of school and is constantly practicing her reading, writing, sight words, and math problems. None of that happened during the hybrid learning, when she wouldn't be in school for days, had little interest in her lessons, and did not have the patience to sit in front of a computer for hours on end. As was voiced by numerous concerned parents during public comments at past meetings, it is beyond clear that the hybrid model does not work for our youngest learners. Given the uptick in cases at the high school, tonight I'm asking the board and Superintendent Adley if they have looked further into a different plan for K through 2 to better accommodate their age and learning abilities if schools are forced to return to the hybrid model in the near future. As was obviously apparent during the hybrid period in September, a one-size-fits-all strategy for 5-year-old kindergartners and 18-year-old high school seniors is simply not viable. It is my hope that the board and Superintendent Adley are being proactive in identifying better ways to accommodate and educate our youngest elementary students. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn. Next speaker, please.
There are no more raised hands at this time.
Great. We will turn it over to the superintendent's report.
Good evening, everyone. And if you're looking in, thank you for joining us this evening as we enter our 5th week of in-school learning. A huge thank you to our staff, in particular, we may say to our nursing staff for all of their efforts and basically trying to keep everybody safe. And we very much appreciate that, and they go well beyond that. I would also recognize the staff in general. I think that the learning that has taken place in the mode we are in is a reflection of their dedication, their talent, and their hard work and their efforts. So with that, I certainly express our continued appreciation, as I do to our parent community, for all of your cooperation. As board chair says, this is a community of charge and a community event in the sense of keeping our kids safe. So we thank you for partnering with us in that. Board chair also mentioned the recent October 22nd, last Thursday, the cancellation of the high school to go to remote. Thank you to everyone for their understanding of our parent community. I certainly tested the system pretty quickly. It's a wee bit of a testament to the system, particularly to our high school staff, how quickly they could adapt. It's just short notice. And if you were stuck in that traffic, board members otherwise, I apologize about that. But it's important that we do make the decision in the best interest of our students. We continue to do that as a characteristic of this district. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that during the reopening plan, but I just want to recognize our community for that quick transition, which wouldn't happen without their cooperation. Let's not forget about our students' cooperation and also the readiness of the staff. So thank you for that. We did have a number of parent workshops, meetings, or whatever you would like to call them, but there were 6 sessions, and they were very well received, very well presented, and just very well received by the community in general. It actually proved very informative for us to listen to some vignettes and some recommendations and thoughts, and it was a two-way conversation, and it was very well received, and we're doing some reflection on and some takeaways from that actual meeting, or there's 6 of them. Some people joined, at least 4 of them, which is giving a lot of kudos for staying the course. We will continue to recognize our veterans this year. Obviously, it's not in person, but we'll do it remotely, and make sure we appropriately express the honor and appreciation to our veterans. The bus transportation study analysis is nearing completion, and it will come to the board immediately thereafter. Yeah, it is the season, and it's the budget season that's well underway. Budgets are coming from departments and schools for consideration and review this particular week. And November 3rd is election day, as we know, and there's no school that day. And Mr. Tramberg, along with the staff, have planned a tremendous day of professional learning, remote learning for the staff.
Great, thank you. With that, we will move on to the approval of minutes. It's requested that the board approve the following minutes. Minutes of the special meeting and executive session held on October 13th, 2020, and minutes of the regular meeting held on October 13th, 2020. May I have a motion? Mr. Maroney so moves, Mr. Burke seconds, all in favor, and that is unanimous. Thank you, everybody. Are there any board committee reports this evening?
Just real quick. Sorry, Dennis. You did have your hand up. I just jumped right in. The finance committee did meet on Wednesday, October 21st. And just to keep everyone apprised, all the committee members were present, and we will review that information later on in the meeting. And there are some transfers to approve.
Thank you. Mr. Maroney.
The Facilities Committee met on the 15th of October. In this meeting, the committee saw the first draft from Northeast Collaborative Architects for the removal of portable classrooms in Library and Media Center and Learning Commons study. The study was ambitious and it ventured into gymnasiums and large gathering spaces for the elementary school. The committee noted its concern about the increased scope of the draft. The committee requested additional information, including some revisions, information about the high school, Middlesex, Tokenique, and capacity information reconciling our policy and enrollment to the current and proposed spaces. The committee's next scheduled committee meeting is 12 November. Given the scope and questions raised in the October meeting, we anticipate needing additional direction from the board and plan to bring that forward when we have the remaining items from the architect.
Thank you. Any other committee meetings? Mr. Burke.
Yes, the policy committee met on Friday, October 23rd, with all members present. I'll defer the report since we're on the agenda later on.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Okay. We'll move on to presentations and discussions. An update on reopening. Dr. Adler.
So again, I've sort of confined for the most part the reopening update to the changes that have happened since last time we were at the table. The most latest draft you have in print, because I tried to include over the weekend any comments that I got from board members that questions they may have. And that's so dark I can hardly read that, but that's okay. But fortunately, I can read my own. So we've had a successful 4 weeks. Hopefully the parents at home can actually see that. If not, it's posted. We had 6 confirmed COVID cases. I do have a breakdown of that a little bit later on in the presentation. Thank you for, again, the parents for the high school last minute change to remote. Again, it did test the system. Again, kudos to everybody for their adaptability. It's not certainly our practice to call something late or late or early, depending on how you look at it. We did have discussions. We'll have subsequent discussions with our Director of Public Health and our medical advisor, because under these new situations, ideally, when we're talking about COVID scenarios or otherwise, we have been doing things collaboratively, and it's with that I would ordinarily do something collaboratively, right? So that needs to take place, but it also doesn't preclude me in an event where I have to make a last-minute decision. So all the information wasn't apparent to me until early in the morning, and at that point, I had to make a call, which precluded me even talking to our Director of Health. I do that in the best interest in the health and safety of our students. We will put some processes in place that will allow us, all things being equal, not to make a call after 9:30 because communication with people, so on and so forth. The reality of that day was that the contact tracing had not been complete, and we did not want to take any risk of students who we thought were a contact to walk into the high school without confirmation that they would not be there. So there was other contact tracing. We needed to complete the circle of students and a few staff members. And so it's with that I made the decision to go to remote learning at the school. But having said that, even though if you to put things in place, even ideally for a last minute call, or a call not to be made any later than 9:30 or whatever, because I have to consult with our medical advisors, that will not preclude a situation if a parent calls at 11 o'clock or if a parent calls early in the morning and said, I found out I had a case. So it's just not going to preclude those situations entirely. And so this situation is also a little bit like any other emergency situation that you would want me to adjudicate over and make decisions, health and wellness, safety decisions in the best interest of the students. So that's the story of Thursday, October 22nd, which for the students turned out to be a good day in the sense of how well they adapted and how quickly our staff, many of our staff were at the school and had to turn around their stay. And the same was for some students along the way. So again, my deep appreciation for everyone's flexibility and adeptness and being able to change. I'll be happy to answer questions after every slide or at the end, whatever. I give you the 244, and I say a comment there for 313 remote learners. There's a change this week. So it's really reported on Monday. So I actually slipped in this because of this number, because it shows a pretty significant increase, but we have a pretty significant increase in the number of students who are quarantining. So that's the vast majority of the increase there because they have to go to remote learning. An update on the 180 days and 900 hours. As of today, I checked back in again. There is a meeting with the commissioner tomorrow about this, and I'll be apprised thereafter of the stance and position of the State Department of Education. The arrivals and dismissals logistics are improving. I want to give again recognition to Chief Anderson and the police department for doing a tremendous job and doing the best they certainly can. For our staff for making some mitigations and plans to try and implement some processes and procedures that would help with the situation. And it has. It's not ideal. And there's not as if there are no problems, but we're making some progress along the way. The main areas of concern continue to be Oxbridge and Middlesex. I would say Oxbridge has made some progress in terms of the timing. Middlesex, the same, but continue to have a little bit of Hollow Ridge there, that congestion area. I spoke to the parent meetings that I thought were very well presented by the staff and well received by parents this week.
So to answer your question, Dr. Adley, I'd like to get through the attendance slide and then take questions that kind of groups it together, and then we'll do the next group of questions together.
Since the last time we spoke, the outside services have begun to clean the buildings for the last 2 Saturdays. That's been very well received by our staff and families. The testing and contact tracing video has been posted. I won't begin to talk about PCR tests, but I'll certainly let Alicia, if she would like to talk about the importance of that test, the relevance of that test, and how we actually use it. And as we have left on other presentations, we just recognize that the community effort that it takes. And the more that we know about things, the more that our community members, our parents, communicate directly with our nursing staff about cases and about situations and travel plans and everything in between, the better off everybody is in the community. I know Alicia is here. Alicia, can you hear me?
Let's have her discuss
Yeah,
PCR
yes.
tests and why it's here.
Yeah, you don't want
I'm
me.
here.
Sure. Alicia, could you just talk about the significance of the PCR test, please?
Sure. So for people who do not have symptoms, we've been finding that there's been quite a few false positives, and the State Department of Health has come out and given some further guidance over the past couple of weeks and really are recommending the PCR test, which is the gold standard for COVID testing at this point. If you are symptomatic, the antigen test, which is also called the quick test, it's kind of referred to as that, can provide accurate results, but it's really meant for people who have symptoms and not for asymptomatic people. So we have, we've been working with Dr. Kennefick, Dr. Shaw, and Dr. David Knopf about what we should be recommending. So for students who maybe have been exposed but don't have symptoms, they should really get a PCR test to see if they are positive. If we have students who are symptomatic and they get a they get an antigen test, the quick test, and it shows they're positive, then that is a positive that we consider to be confirmed as a positive, and we do contact tracing. Based on that, if they get a negative test, but they're still very symptomatic, then the doctor will order a PCR test to confirm whether or not they are positive or negative. So a student with symptoms who test negative with the antigen test should then have the test verified with a PCR if the test result doesn't match what we're expecting to find based on symptoms. And that's something they would discuss with their doctor. But until their symptoms are improved and they have either a negative PCR test or they've been out of school for 10 days, then they can return. But our big push right now is for asymptomatic people to be tested with the PCR and then to confirm a negative test on a symptomatic person with a PCR.
So PCR seems to be the way to go.
It's the way to go. What it looks for, the hard part about the PCR is it doesn't test for live virus. What it looks for is for pieces of the genetic material, RNA, of COVID. So it detects that, and that can be detected whether you have an active case or not. But that's definitely the confirmation test to have done. So we're really hoping for people to get a PCR when they're symptomatic or asymptomatic.
So let's run through attendance and then we'll come back. Let's just get through one more and then we'll take it all as a group.
This was sort of on the record the last time, but it was we completed the circle with it with more communication. So it was just to reiterate that we certainly have been very flexible. I think my lens is really, are we reasonable with our requests? And I think in this case, we're very reasonable. If we're looking to be accommodating to our community, the idea, if you want to switch, first of all, from one mode to another, 72 hours is a very, very reasonable time frame. Many of the surrounding districts and so on, you're locked out for a quarter or you're locked out for the semester. So again, I would very much appreciate the work of our staff and being flexible for the community and going the extra yard and making those changes quickly, because they happen pretty regularly in some cases. The reason we just don't do things automatically, it just does require some transition. Having been in the classrooms, having seen what the teachers are doing with the cameras and how difficult it is to actually execute the remote learning, it just is. It's just hard work, and there's preparation to be done that people just can't be just dropped in, dropped out, or else it's just going to get a wee bit chaotic. And I think what we've built in there is a reasonable time frame. So particularly, we want to make sure it's okay to be out sick, as we have said at this table before. That happens in ordinary, normal times, whatever that happens to mean at this point, and it's okay in this particular case. But it's understandable that people would want to perhaps transition from one to the other. But it is okay if you have an illness that is, it could be something other, a toothache or a stomach ache that's perhaps not related, or a symptom or a possible symptom. We also want to be, our administration and staff wanted to be empathetic to the fact that we don't want to convey the wrong message. If people are being conservative and trying to make sure that they make the right decision, then they don't want that to work against them either. So this idea of between 24 hours and 48 hours, unfortunately, that falls upon the shoulders of our talented nursing staff. They will work with families and students who are absent due to illness. And if they determine that, in their opinion, that you stay out, and the expert opinion of the nurses that they stay out as a conservative approach towards COVID or otherwise symptoms, then we would transition real quickly from 24 to 48 hours. Any of the students who are quarantined are automatically remote learners. That's essentially the attendance policy at the moment. And I know that sometimes has been difficult for some people, but again, I would go back to say I think it's a reasonable practice. I'll pause there because you're asking me to pause, Madam Chair.
Questions? Mr. Burke?
Dr. Hadley, as you conduct your Friday afternoon meetings with the faculty and the additional training, whether it's at the high school or the other schools, are there any significant or noteworthy trends that you're hearing from our teachers in terms of academic delivery to our students?
Do you want to talk a wee bit through what you actually mean by academic?
Well,
I understand that. But
I know that you have the meeting, you have faculty training and meetings on Fridays.
Sure.
And what I was asking, are there any significant trends or feedback that you're getting back from the faculty in terms of their teaching methods and their ability to teach in this environment, not related to safety, but just straight academic teaching?
So there are specific things around some of the technical issues that we provided training in. So that's a particular area, but also our PLCs, your instructional practices, what has worked, not just the technical part of it, but what instructionally is working in the classroom in order to provide something either online to people or in person. Because that doesn't stop either in terms of if you're a group of science teachers, you still have to talk about how are we instructionally providing the curriculum to people, what's the feedback, what's the changes that we're making instructionally. Chris, if you want to speak any more to that, you can.
I would just add, as a continuation from last time we talked about it, just the challenge of collaboration and small group instruction when students can no longer work in small groups. So the technology that goes with that has been a challenge, and just the behavioral, less stamina than before. So one of the big adjustments in my conversations with teachers across all grade levels is just the ability to have the stamina to get through the day with the same way they may have last spring. And that's new learning as well.
I would say that this Friday afternoon, just because you mentioned Friday afternoon, honestly, it's critical. In most cases, the staff have lost their common planning time together, right, and their PLC time together because of the way we had to do the schedules. And this is the opportunity to do that. We have like support services who have been trained to bring kids together in groups and so on and so forth. Now we have to, forget the term, untrain them to do something different. So it just applies right across the spectrum of student needs. And it's just, I can't tell you how valuable it is to the staff and how much they value it in terms of supporting the kids in the classroom.
Thank you.
Mrs. Ritchie.
Sorry. The uptick in remote learners, so there's 69. The 244 was at the beginning of last week,
Yeah.
and the 313 is where we are currently.
Yep.
And there's 69. Are those all related to quarantine?
Well, we have 55 students being quarantined at the moment. So
There's,
the
there's
vast
only
majority.
55 students being quarantined?
Yes. Actually, there's a couple of those would be actually doesn't distinguish between adults and students, so I'll have to just calibrate how many. But
Okay.
but the vast majority of that number are being quarantined.
Okay.
Any other questions? Mr. Maroney?
Yeah, so just a couple of questions, but first a comment of that last meeting you mentioned that we were the only Durgay school that you thought was fully open. So
Yes.
I think we missed that, and I think we as the board and a community want to thank you for your plan and your fastidiousness to keep the schools open. So congratulations on that. Thank you from me and parents to the board and the community and to all the staff and teachers.
Thank you, Dennis. I pass that on to our staff. Thank you.
But I have a question on the busing. So, and maybe this is too in the weeds, but I'm concerned about the last minute problem and that the fact that the students were already on the buses going to the school. I'm nervous that what would happen in an elementary school where a child would get on a bus and be brought to school, and a parent would go to work or go somewhere, and then school is not open, and that child goes where? And how do we handle something like that?
So again, we'll do everything we can to avoid that situation, obviously. But kids aren't just dropped off to go to particular younger schools. Kids need to be picked up, and even students at the high school would have been received at the high school and kept at the high school until we communicated with parents for pickups.
Okay.
Mr. Singh?
So I just want to follow up on that and fully realizing that contact tracing is going on, beyond the midnight hours. You mentioned earlier that you're working on some protocols or processes, just refining it.
Sure.
Could you just go a little further on that?
Yeah, I could. We've had discussions with, again, the Director of Public Health and Alicia, our nurse and supervisor, and Dr. Kennefick, our medical advisor. And because in this case, if we are closing because of COVID-related matters, for the most part, well, not for the most part, I'm required, right? And it makes common sense this has been a collaborative effort the whole way along, and their expertise is important. So I would want to make sure that they are in the loop. So we have sort of said that, look, listen, if we have to make a late call, we need to be able to talk to them by about 9 o'clock in order to reasonably get to our parents and notification for the next morning. So that's basically one of the processes we've put in place. But again, I can't preclude a very last minute scenario that someone thinks they're doing the right thing and communicating with us, and then therefore I got to make a lot, even outside Dr. Kennefick or David. But that's basically what we're put in place.
So can I ask a clarifying question following up on that? there's the notification to the health department of a positive COVID test. And then there's the decisions to open and close schools. Now, both of those things we hope can happen in tandem, but I feel like what I'm hearing you say is, I guess maybe let me simplify. Was the health director notified of the COVID case the night before?
The director of health knew about the COVID case we were working on, yes.
So the concern was that all the contract tracing and notification hadn't been received.
Correct.
Okay, so hopefully we can marry those two things, but the health director was aware of a COVID case, really was the management on the administration's end of, have we contacted all the people that this person may have come in contact with?
Yes, both that and actually hearing back from them too. So some cases when you have so many to do, you may have to leave a message and so on, but if you don't get a message back, you can't just hope that that person is not going to walk into the school. So it's all that communication.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Ritchie.
So just to continue on that discussion, I think, and again, thank you to everyone. I echo Dennis's comments. I think it was the right thing to do, even though it came at the last minute. We have to err on the side of caution when it comes to these things. But I'm starting to look at it almost like a snow day. At some point, you have to tell people what's going on, and nobody's going to get a COVID test at 3 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning. So I think if there's a system in place that at least by 5 o'clock in the morning, like a snow day, families are aware school is closed, whether it be that, one school is closed because we haven't completed contact tracing. Is there a way that we can work sort of a system similar to that? So that we're, at some point, a decision has to be made.
Yes, we've already discussed that too. So it should, for the most part, replicate that timing. Yes.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, so it's kind of moving off topic, but kind of going to the 900 hours and learning. So I don't see in our deck anything about assessments and how we are in determining how much or not students' learning has been affected by the pandemic and how we're going to remediate that loss or potential loss.
So we did mention that and report on that the last time, but I'll be happy either when we get to the remote learning or actually right now. Do you want to comment on the assessments?
Our first assessment window just closed on Friday, the 23rd. So we are looking at the data in two ways. One is looking at the student cohorts from last year at this time to this year, and then doing cross-cohort comparison. So what did first graders look like during this assessment window last year? What do first graders look like this year? From there, we'll make some determinations about pacing and any adjustments that we need to make to curriculum. And even though the assessment window closed, there's a forgiveness of trying to make those up as well. So we want to get every single student assessed that we possibly can. And we also had our full remote learners that participated in the remote testing center, which is this room.
Additional questions? Mrs. Ritchie.
I just wanted to go to the, Alicia was talking about the types of testing that are available. So are we requesting that people, if they're asymptomatic and they've been contact traced, to go and get a PCR test? Is that required, or we just, I guess we can't require it. So we're suggesting that they go and get, because we know that's the gold standard. There's a very high failure rate with the rapid test. I think there's a little confusion in the community. Some have told me there's a rapid PCR test, and I've spoken to people in the medical community and they've told me that doesn't exist as far as they know. So I think we have to be clear with people if there's a difference between the two. And obviously we can't tell them what to get in terms of testing, but just to understand that the PCR test does take time for results to come in, and people need to be patient, but that is the gold standard. It is the best test that's out there. And if you're asymptomatic, it's really what you should be getting. I think that's what I heard Alicia say. Is that correct?
That's correct. They are able to run a PCR test faster. We've had some done in the same day, a stat test. And then my understanding is that at Tully, they actually have a rapid PCR. It takes about three or 4 hours to come back, but not 30 minutes that kids have had and adults have had done.
Okay, so that would be at Tully. There's a rapid PCR.
That's my understanding is there's rapid PCR tests that they're able to run there.
I can attest it exists.
Yeah. So is it a rapid test, or is it just they're able to process the PCR test faster?
I can attest to it is rapid in that, like Alicia says, it's 3 to 4 hours, but they only have a certain number per day. So there's no guarantee when you go to tele you will get one.
Just call it a fast PCR. Stay away from the word rapid because it causes a lot of confusion.
But
Well,
there's
I think that's what the point I'm trying to get is. A lot of people are saying to me there is a rapid PCR test, and I think the two don't go hand in hand, because I think it's just the PCR test is being processed faster than normally would if it was done in a normal lab.
I think we're really looking at PCR versus antigen, and it sounds as if what we're recommending is a PCR test to find your most accurate results. I am not a doctor. I don't play one on TV, but I feel like that's probably how we at this table should refer to it, so we know what information we're giving out. The antigen test seems to have less accuracy and gives some false positives, although if you're symptomatic, it can be a viable test, but in general, a PCR will give you the most accurate. And then the quickness or rapidness of it, we will leave to doctors and the people who run these things. But we'll do PCR.
That's pretty good.
antigen.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do
Well
want
done,
to,
Tara.
we had some members of the community went to the step for the PCR, and actually it was very helpful for them as a family, but particularly helpful for us. And we express our appreciation for people who actually can go and do that extra step where necessary.
Can I follow up
So-
just quickly on that?
Sure.
I know students can't, if they've been contact traced, students cannot test out of their quarantine. Can staff members test out of the quarantine?
I do not believe so, no. Alicia?
No.
Thank you.
So I think with all of this talk, and we're not going to solve it here, but I'm sure as a board, we're going to want to know with the holidays coming up, maybe at our next meeting, we could hear if the administration has any messaging, best practices, advice that we can just put out, given our staff and our students, and the traditions we may or may not all be following. But I think any thought now going forward would be helpful. But we don't need to answer it now, because I have no idea what the answer is now either.
Do you want to hear a perspective or you?
No, I think we can get
Okay.
a perspective November 10th, because we still have time at that
Okay,
point.
all right.
And siblings as well, if we could hear about siblings returning from colleges and how that should be handled.
Just we'll start to see more movement around the holidays, maybe some suggestions as best as you can, realizing we're an educational institution, but as best we can give any advice given the amount of shifting that tends to happen around the holidays. Mrs. Ritchie.
Sorry, just on attendance, because it's been asked of me. When a child just has a sick day, the remote, moving that quickly to remote is not a possibility. But if a child has something other than COVID and is going to be out for an illness for an extended period of time, then moving to remote is a possibility. So in other words, if you know your child has a high fever and they're on antibiotics and they're going to be home for a couple of days, you can move them into remote. Is that correct? I don't know.
You have it.
So just say the end part. The
So
first part.
the child is sick,
Yeah.
but you've gone to the physician and it's going to be an extended illness, even though it's not COVID and they're not under quarantine, they could still, according to what I'm seeing here, they could still become a remote learner for that period of time. Maybe not immediately, but
With the permission
Right.
from the nurse, they can. And if you want to, Alicia, if you want to share kind of what the filter is you would use for that decision making, you certainly may do that.
So the nurses will talk with the family and try to get an idea of how long it looks like they'll be out, what the symptoms are, if they've been given an alternate diagnosis. And if the student is feeling well enough to actually attend online. Some parents that I've spoken with, I know that the nurses have spoken with, the students are really not feeling well. So it's not recommended that they do that, but they may be able to do that as they start to recover to go online. So we will move them, understanding that if they're not able to attend class, they would be marked absent, virtually absent. And so we've had situations where we're waiting to see how things kind of pan out over a couple of days, and we try to move them as quickly as we can. I'm not really sure I'm answering your question, but
Oh, you are. That's perfect. I want parents to understand that if their child is just out for 1 or 2 days, that moving to a remote is probably not going to work because they're sick and they should be home and
Right.
getting better. But if it's an extended illness and they start to feel better over the course of that illness and they need to go into remote learning, that is a possibility for them to switch.
right. And the exclusion criteria is, stands from previous years, but it's been added to if they really have symptoms on those top symptoms on the COVID list, which is a fever, obviously, but fever, the new onset persistent cough, loss of taste or smell, a severe sore throat or a severe headache. We are recommending that parents speak with their healthcare provider for further advice and probably testing. And so usually that takes a few days to get the testing done. And so they would then be moved to remote learning, and we'll wait and see what happens. If they test negative, then they're able to come back. If you choose not to take your child for a test, which is fine, we are really trying to follow those symptoms, the public health protocol, which is they should be out for 10 days, which kind of almost assumes that they're positive, but we wouldn't do any contact tracing, that kind of thing with that, because we don't have a positive test. And then if they test negative or they have an alternate diagnosis, they saw the doctor, they have strep throat and they need to be out for a couple of days while they get the antibiotics going and they start to feel better, then we would try to move them to online learning. But if they're going to be out for 1 or 2 days because they went to the doctor, they know they have strep and they're coming back, we probably would just have them be absent for the 24 hours until they could return.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll move on to our next topic, but Alicia, while I here want to again say thank you. I'm not sure everyone in the community knows how much of the contact tracing, even for all of Darien, the school nurses are doing, how hard Alicia is working, sometimes at 11 o'clock at night when those phone calls come in. So Alicia, thank you. Thank you for all the work you guys are doing on behalf of the schools, but also for all the work that your staff has done on behalf of the town. This contract tracing is laborious, and you guys have really shown how dedicated you are to your craft. So thank you very much for all your hard work, and please let the entire nursing staff, on behalf of the Board of Education, know how thankful we are.
I'll do that, and that's appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Adley, athletics and extracurricular.
So we added this one in from the last time, just as an update. For the winter season, scheduled to start 11/21 through February 21. CIC is looking at discussing mitigating strategies for some of our programs, such as basketball. I don't know how they conceivably can do it for wrestling and so on and so forth, but we'll see. The special season has been created for football and any other fall or winter sport that doesn't complete 40% of its season. I was really pleased to see the amount of activities that are being run for our students. Albeit I think the entirety of them at this point, or at least most of them, are being run virtually, but the clubs are up and running at the elementary school, middle school, and high school. And the students are actively participating in those. So it's encouraging to see those operational. So an update.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pause only because then we go to remote and full remote learning, and that seems distinct as well.
Okay.
Questions around athletics and extracurriculars? Mrs. Stein.
I have a question. Dr. Adley, I hear there's some misinformation going around about spectators at some of the athletic events on our campus. My understanding is that all private leagues that rent our fields, whether it's soccer, field hockey, lacrosse, softball, baseball, have spectators. And similarly, DJFL teams could have spectators as long as they are compliant with the governor's orders. The decision to have spectators or not at the senior football league games, am I correct in understanding that that's a DJFL decision or a U decision? I know that for the other high school sports right now, including the 7-on-7 football, we're allowing 2 parents to attend all competitions, JV, varsity, freshmen. So can you just clarify, because I've heard from a lot of parents some concerns about spectating.
It's not a Darien Public Schools decision. It's a decision of the organization, as long as they comply with the executive orders.
Thank you.
I just want to be clear, just before this meeting, I got a question about sports and why we were running or not. I think part of that is people are concerned if sports are the reason for COVID uptick. I haven't seen that, to tell you the truth. And in my last conversations with the governor, he was saying they were finding it wasn't schools. Schools were not spreading. School activities were not spreading. Again, not a doctor, not going to pretend to be one, but that it was the small interactions we all engage in, taking off our masks, seeing someone we all miss and love, giving them a hug. And so again, his words were, please encourage people to stay safe, to follow the guidelines. That would keep us safe. That would keep our kids in activities. We've discussed many times at this table, whether it be a club or a sport or something, the mental health aspect of this, especially among our young students. But really the question I got is, well, what decision are you all making? And while there may be decisions if something happens in this town that the administration might have to make, I think what we have said as a board, and again, I would ask the superintendent to confirm my understanding, is that SEAC, because they really govern and know the world of sports and have the most information around sports. And in any of their conversations, whether it be the Department of Public Health or whatever experts they reach out to, are making recommendations around sports, and we are following that as the non-sport experts. Unless there is anything truly extenuating in Darien that we would have to react to, that we would still follow that both for the winter and the spring seasons. Is that correct?
Fortunately or unfortunately, that is correct.
Well, I understand that sometimes it gets dicey with their information, but I know some people say, I got the message last night, is it sports? You guys should cancel sports. And I really think that we're trying to be experts where we're experts and not pretend to be experts in a pandemic where we're not. And right now, CX business is sports. They're talking with the Department of Health. We're taking their recommendations. We haven't seen inside of our own sports teams, at least I haven't heard reported, Alicia and Dr. Adley, that we are seeing upticks around that, but we're asking everyone to stay vigilant. Stay vigilant. I just, as people say, well, why aren't you doing this or why aren't you doing that? I want to let them know how our decision matrix is. And right now our decision matrix is SEAC. And if we needed to readjust, we would, but we are not seeing anything, if I'm correct, from our extracurriculars or athletics that are causing a spike.
That is correct. Our experts, health experts are telling us that some of the safest places are essentially schools because they got the greatest mitigation strategies that are being practiced, and that our cases have surfaced from outside activities, one way or the other.
Okay.
Tara, could I
Yes, Mr. Sini.
just the governor also said sports-related activities like carpool
Yes.
gatherings. And so I also wanted to call out a communication I saw from our athletic director that basically encouraged, I think, these sports teams not to congregate in these breakfasts, these dinners, that sort of thing. So it is, it's a gray area what sports related is, but it's not on-field kind of competition, which the governor clearly said that wasn't the case.
The best I heard is if you want to play your season, make sure you follow the rules.
Yeah.
All these informal extras, you want to play, follow the rules. So
Thank you.
I agree. And I do think we heard things like dinners and carpools, please avoid. And I think that was an appreciated communication from the administration. Mrs. Ritchie.
Honestly, that's what I'm just waiting to hear. This is all we know at this point.
Okay, other questions around athletics, or can we move on? And I will take remote learning, and then we'll move to expenditures.
Mr. Chandler.
So this is a follow-up to the survey that we sent to our remote learning families. And when I shared those initial results at our last meeting, that was about 76 respondents. And so when the survey closed, we had 94 responses that represent 126 of our remote learners. Just a reminder also that anytime this survey is given, it's representing a snapshot in time because our remote learning families potentially change every week. The next box just represents the breakdown of the percentage by school of where those remote learners are coming from. And that chart at the very bottom represents the remote learners by grade level at the time of the survey. So there's no great predictability to this. And if you take a look at this on any given week, it may look a bit different for many reasons. We can go to the next slide.
One back.
Oh, sorry.
So looking at the remote learner, thinking about remote learners having the tools that they need to be successful, we are doing much better than we were at one point with that. And there were 94 narrative responses as to what the successes and challenges were. And these are the themes that really cover what the successes and challenges were. So we have independence, responsibility, technology skills, and more synchronous instruction as what were called out over and over as successes. And the thematic challenges are socialization, specifically time with peers, some tech issues with sound, Zoom, Wi-Fi. There were some Zoom issues at the high school, but that has been addressed, and I believe that is much better. I have not heard otherwise. Collaboration and interaction as another challenge, and that really relates to the students, not only the socialization with peers, but being able to do that group work with their peers if you have students at home and students in school, teacher feedback, and just ways for students to share their learning live and in person. So those are the themes that have emerged. We are going to work to see what we can do to address some of these things moving forward with the building administrators as we anticipate remote learning can continue to take on many forms and affect different families throughout the year.
Chris, is that supposed to be 57% in the pie chart?
It is.
Yeah.
It is not. So
Okay.
the data, two different data sets merged and got wonky, and so I just reran the numbers as I was looking at all of the charts, and the percentage of agree and strongly agree is 63% right now. So ignore that. I will update it.
Mr. Brown.
Could you just map, you tell the colors in the boxes, which percentage map to which, I'm sorry.
So on this, the 37 is the agree, and 24%, or the 37% is strongly agree. And then I have a slide in front of me with better color. I can't see that well either.
So 6% is agree, right?
So the 37% is strongly agree on this. And I'm sorry, the green is strongly agree and the blue is agree, the dark blue. I will update this
Yeah,
slide.
so
Much
the-
appreciated.
yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
Was it reversed?
Yeah.
Maybe different
My sl-
colors, not shades of the same color.
Believe it or not, on my slides, it's different colors than what's on the screen right now.
Oh, really?
And it's the same
First
presentation.
slide was a different color. What's
Yeah,
happening?
they're changing colors
Changing colors
inexplicably
this
tonight.
time.
I believe, I totally.
So could we follow up a little bit on the question that we heard from the public? Should we need to transition back to a hybrid or a remote learner? Have we tackled some of the issues, and or are we in the process of tackling some of the issues that especially our elementary students felt?
I would say,
Oh, sorry.
I would say both. So I feel like we've tackled many, and over the past few weeks, I've spent as much time as I could talking to teachers specifically about their readiness and trying to make sure we don't repeat any of the challenge areas if we can avoid them, and making a smooth transition back to either model.
And are we feeling that teachers are more comfortable with our Seesaw platform?
I would say yes. We also have someone coming in to provide some professional development to support that on November 3rd. Today, I distributed to the principals, and yesterday the team leaders received a Seesaw readiness checklist to make sure that they know what the expectations are and they can let us know if they're still struggling in any of those areas. And many of us are willing to go around and provide any help we can to make sure they're ready.
Great. Mr. Deneen.
part of thinking through the plan, as we've seen over the last couple of weeks, these things happen quickly. So as you build a plan, are you to the point now where if something happens at the town level, the state level, or the federal level, we have to go hybrid or we have to go remote, and that decision's made during the day or later in the day? Is there a day that we're down? Is there 2 days that we're down? What is it going to take you to switch over to one of those models? Is it instantaneously? Have you decided in defining all of this that you need a day to ramp up, you need 2 days to ramp up? I think that's something you have to think about. And I think that would help the public, know if this happens, okay, from a planning perspective, we're down a day or two or whatever it takes.
You can go ahead, but you can just be honest, okay?
So, and you might not be there yet, and it's fine, but I think it's something you have to think about.
I would say we're right there,
Okay.
but not finalized yet.
Okay.
And it might not look the same across all levels because
Sure.
we've tested the system a bit, and we can say that some schools might be ready to go overnight and others might need some time. And we're also building a plan if the time is needed, that there would be an asynchronous learning opportunity, so we're not shutting down for a day completely.
We're very much likely to need a day at the primary school level, and there are curricula ready for that particular day. So we've had those discussions. Those discussions have primarily occurred administratively, so we're going to need to continue to have those with the staff. But those are exactly the discussions that we're having. I will also say the discussion that came up about early childhood and the model for that. Those are discussions that are having right now with our staff, our minister staff at this point, and we'll continue to look at that.
Thank you.
Mr. Maroney.
So on this survey, this is for the, the entire school district. Do we see any division between primary and secondary schooling? Is there a difference of how satisfied the students and their families are?
Yes, so the older the students tend to be, the more satisfied they were with remote learning, just I would say because of the higher level of independence. But I would also say that in the narrative comments, it was also clear that things have gotten better, and especially as there was more live instruction, students were more engaged in making those connections. And in an impressive way, families reported that students felt connected to their teachers, even though connecting to the peers was a challenge. So that's another testament to the work that teachers are doing.
In addition to the parent meetings, we got some feedback, from our remote learners there. Everything from I can't see the teacher in some cases to the whiteboard has a glare. Can we try and rectify that? So that's very helpful.
Mr. Suni.
I'm sorry, Ms. McCowan is trying to get in on the.
She's there.
Oh, Jill, can you hear us?
She's muted under Crosby.
Okay.
I am. If they could turn my video on so that if I raise my hand, you can see me. She may not have realized it was me. Thank you.
It's your camera's not on. There you go. That would help.
Thank you. It was turned off. Thank you.
She needed to leave the meeting. She's attending now remotely. Did you have a question?
No, sorry. I just wanted to make sure that I could raise my hand if the time comes. Thank you.
Mr. Burke.
So Dr. Adley, I know that you talked about the curricula. So just so I understand, so the teachers are preparing or in the process of preparing to give their programs and their teaching remotely if they have to. They're developing their lessons plans accordingly if there has to be a shift from in-person learning to remote learning, and they're getting all the help that they need with that, if I understand what you and Chris are saying.
Well, the system is in a stage of readiness to transition from one phase to another. The actual assistance that they're given, Chris, instructionally and so on, is happening through department chairs, yourself. If you want to complete that sentence, you can.
So I'm not talking about the technology of flipping. I'm talking about the actual ability of the teachers to all of a sudden or in rapid order go from in-person teaching instruction to remote learning, as they're being trained to be able, given the assistance they need, to be ready to do that in short order if necessary.
Yes, and we're working to remove any ambiguity that might exist with what does live mean, what does synchronous mean, how much time should I be live? So we are working on that quite a bit.
Thank you.
Mrs. Ritchie and then Mr. Maroney.
Just to follow up on so if we move to full remote, that would mean all teachers would be remote. They would not be in the buildings. Is that correct?
At this point, I think at this point, if we had to go full remote, for instance, either because we decided in the town of Darien, or the governor decided everybody's out or something, yeah, at this point, I'd be considering the teachers working from home, yes.
So just
Or they'd have the opportunity to come in,
okay,
unless they're told not to come in by the government.
so logistically, do they just bring that equipment that's in the classroom? Do they just bring that equipment home with
Yes,
them?
yes, they can bring that home.
And if there was another day that we needed to do, like last Thursday, but we want the teachers out of the building because we need to clean the building, do they have that ability to do that on a one-off basis, or that wouldn't be possible because of the equipment they would need?
Do they have the ability to?
So if we had to close school again because of contact tracing like we did last Thursday,
Mhm.
but that we didn't want anyone in the building because we're going to do, hypothetically, we have to do a deep clean. So we don't want them in the building. Do they have the equipment? Is that something that they have at home, or it's,
Well,
they're
the
using
remote, the
that?
remote would happen as it happened, I think, last spring for the most part. Would that be correct?
If I'm hearing this
Yeah,
correctly,
that's right.
if the same thing happened at the elementary school that happened at the high school last
Yes.
week, would we be able to respond similarly?
Right. I'm sorry, I wasn't articulating that.
No, I
well.
just want to make sure that I was understanding it correctly. I would say yes, but because K1 students may not necessarily be bringing their devices back, there may be some delay for some people to get on, but we're working to make sure that we wouldn't lose a day under a circumstance like that.
I think the question is it dependent on a PIVO cameras?
Not necessarily,
That's what I
because you
mean,
can
yeah,
have
right.
you can have a remote day without having that document camera, because if a teacher has a Chromebook or a laptop at home, they can use that. But the IPVOs are very, very portable and light. It's just a matter of if people want to bring them back and forth every day as a precaution.
Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, so one of the points that I think this is where it belongs is one of the points that we've heard is that we focused on social and emotional learning for the first month while we were in hybrid and now. So is there any learnings that we gathered from the focus, and anything you can share of what we understand about?
I actually alluded to it a little bit earlier, is student stamina and approach to work, and those interactions are just more challenging for lots of reasons. One, they're out of practice. Two, it's hard to practice what they used to do because the conditions prevent it. So now we're creating new ways to build those relationships within a class and across a class with peers that are in the classroom and outside of the classroom. So SEL doesn't go away, and those lessons continue with responsive classroom and through Flex and through advisory for the rest of the year. So we'll certainly continue to do that. But we are working to make sure that that's embedded and not saying this is SEL time and this is the only time we talk about SEL, because so much of what SEL refers to is knowing yourself and making those connections between your peers, which happens all day across all content areas. So we certainly learned about specific behaviors, and now it's just a matter of addressing them throughout the regular day.
Any other questions? Okay, Mrs. McCammon.
Chris, have you taken a baseline, or I know we started some assessments. Where are we in that process? Do we have any preliminary baselines, and what are sort of the next steps in terms of what we're doing with assessments right now?
Yes, so the assessment window, our first assessment window, which we call Fall 1 at the elementary level and middle school, closed on Friday, the 23rd. This week is pretty much our makeup week and trying to get any of the stragglers made up. And we're going to look at the data in two ways. One is looking at the students within the cohort from last spring to this fall, and then the same time last year to this year, and then looking across cohorts to say, okay, how did first graders do at this time last year compared to how first graders are doing now? And then look at those two data sets to make some decisions about what we might need to address, whether it be pacing and curriculum in general. So that will be our work over the next couple of weeks. Right now we're in what we call Fall 2, which is assessing students who might not have met benchmark in those Fall 1 assessments.
right, we ready to move on to expenditures? Dr. Adams?
So I don't know what's happening with the colors tonight, but there you go. So this is a summary of the expenditures. We did go to the Board of Finance last week, Board Chair, Mr. Riddle and I, and this is essentially a summary of the numbers that we presented. Your first column is the operating expenses associated with COVID. The grants are associated with COVID. That's the Coronavirus Relief Fund and the ESSER Fund, both combined. That's a summary of the expenditures. When we take away transfers that are being considered by the board and that went to the finance subcommittee, less the grants again gives you sort of the net projection after all the transfers have been made. So that was the details of those are contained in the finance packet this evening. There's a spreadsheet that delineates these expenditures in detail. They include the YMCA, they include the additional cleaning, they include the additional FTEs that were approved by the board. This was presented to the board of Finance. I will say I felt very well received in the sense of how much as you can receive them that way, but to be doing the right things for our students and staff and our community at large. So we'll get into the details of those expenditures, or perhaps we get into those details when we're talking about the finance, if we want to do that, or.
Sure, I mean, I think we should wait for the transfers at that point, but
Yep.
I will say we did go to the Board of Finance. The Board of Finance said that they didn't feel they needed another update before the end of the year. I did ask them whether they would like any appropriations in tranches or closer to the end of the year. I believe Mr. Zagrodzky's term was he was agnostic on how we proceeded, so we'll probably look to hear from the finance department on how we need to proceed with that. We were asked to provide continual financial reports from the finance committee, which we do anyway. They receive our full packet, but certainly that information we'll make available to all Board of Finance members, as we always do. And they just, asked that we keep the dialogue going. If there were any surprises, to please let them know. So while they didn't need to see us back before the end of the year, if there was a major shift, they would like us to come back before the end of the year. But I do think that it was a collaborative meeting, and I had the feeling that they understood we were doing what we needed to do in order to keep our schools running for our children. With that, I had a thought. Athletics, we have down here for the Y expenditures, and this is for use of the pool. Is that for the year or for the fall season?
That's for the fall season.
So my concern as a board is for us to look at the winter season as longer. I don't entirely know how this is being prorated, but I would think that we probably need to engage in those conversations, because we don't want to all of a sudden have a much bigger bill that we are rushing back to the Board of Finance with to understand. I think maybe I would ask the superintendent, with the board's indulgence, to engage in those conversations with the Y, because if winter season is double, I mean, we're looking at a lot of money.
It would be more than that because it includes gymnastics as well. So it would be the boys swim season and the girls gymnastics. So what you're seeing right now on the current report is only the girls swim season.
So at our last update, we were told gymnastics was not on the table. The Y may change that. So I was just doing swimming, but if gymnastics is in there too, I mean, that's the biggest nut I can see outstanding. And so I think we need to be aware of where we are there, because I think then we might need to have a conversation of what the board share of this is, and do we need to start allocating some spending here? Because if you're looking at a $150,000 bill, that's a conversation this board needs to have what to do with that before we go to the Board of Finance, so they feel like we've had a full thorough. Mr. Senior.
Have we gotten a formal bill from the Y, or are these just?
We have a request for the 67, but not for any winter.
Prior to a season starting, this is a season we didn't know and we were in the middle of, but prior to a season starting, I think the board needs to be aware of the costs it's facing. Mr. Denny.
Just, Rich, I think you tried to clarify this last time, but I just want to confirm. So if you look at the 825, 667 for facilities, which a lot of that is cleaning, Majority of that's cleaning. So is that number that we're looking at here, does that take into account we stay in the current mode we are through the end of the year? And that's a forecast as to where we're going
So
to
it
end?
includes, assuming we're going to have weekend cleaning throughout the end of the school year, additional help, contracted help during the week through the end of the school year, replenishment of supplies, whether it's rags or cleaner or things like that.
So this 2675 is kind of looking out as to what our costs would be if we continued in this mode.
Correct. The only item that's not in there, which was mentioned, is the YMCA. We were only given the girls swimming. I think part of that is we kind of put that cutoff at the end of December for using our facilities, our gyms. If that changes, we might not be billed in the spring. If it does change, we might be billed.
Thank you.
So I just think as we look at the budget, the board's going to need to know those scenarios and have a conversation around that. I think we'll get into details, specific details, but does anyone have any other COVID related questions? Okay, COVID status.
I don't even know where those lines come from. I don't know. All sorts of things are happening to those slides over there. Anyway, this is requested by a board member, so I figured we'll put it in. I will say, just in fairness to our staff, it can be unsettling as you do the contact tracing. We're trying to be very respectful of individual rights and privacy, right, and FERPA and so on. So we try and share as much information as we can, but I just share that because it's just, you're in a classroom, you can't really identify people, and certain students are, the nursing staff is talking about certain students and removing certain students and so on and so forth. It just is, it's hard because you can't really identify, you can't really share what you want to share or think you need to share. This is the level as much as we probably can share that talks about the individuals, whether they're an adult or whether they are a student. So it's sort of self-explanatory itself, but the cases are increasing, the quarantines are increasing. On our website is the current status. So if you went on the website, hopefully you would see 6 and 55, and the number of places should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different sites, or maybe it's a 6, 1, 2, no, 3, 4, 5. So currently the dashboard shows the current status. This is just at a national request to see.
Question. Mr. Seaman.
If somebody resides outside of Darien, I realize this is the school count. I'm assuming they will not show up in the Darien count.
On our site?
For the town.
The town. So if somebody's trying to reconcile the town Department of Public Health with the Darien schools, if there's I mean, I'm gonna make an assumption, a staff member that is a positive but resides out of town, I'm assuming we will capture them in this report and on our website. But I'm assuming they would probably show up on their own town's website. Or
that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Ritchie.
So the first column is the current COVID cases.
Yes, yes.
And then the second column is the current COVID quarantine cases.
Anybody who's been quarantined, yes.
And then cumulative cases would represent
Since the start.
since the start of
Since we've been
cumulative of what?
just total number of the current cases are the cumulative, and the cumulative cases is the same at this particular point.
But
And
the
so
but the numbers are different.
which
So-
numbers are different?
You shouldn't have less cumulative than current. Yeah.
That's a good question.
Why don't we
It's
update?
not coming to me just at the moment, but it should. Alicia,
Dr. Adley,
is that because they drop off?
that slide was from our presentation to staff yesterday, and it's
Yeah.
it didn't reflect, that was earlier in the day. It didn't reflect the 2 other cases that we found out about later in the afternoon.
Is that
And I think Tokenique is missing off of that slide, but it doesn't really add a whole lot.
Oh, it does. Right. Well, we'll have to get the correct slide. I apologize.
Yeah, we'll get an
Yes.
updated
Let's
slide.
do that. Yep. Thank you. All right.
That's okay.
Although we will
It's a
get
great
an,
slide, though.
yeah,
That's
we
a
will
great
get
slide.
we will get an updated slide to the board. I just want to caution the public when our information goes up. As soon as it goes up, it could be outdated in a situation like this. So this is a perfect example. I've been maybe missing token E. So you will have the most current information the board has, just realize it fluctuates as we get information. The last is just the metrics.
The last is the metrics. The metrics, the Department of Public Health has changed their metrics slightly. Where now it's a 14-day average. I will share the first slide. This is sort of like, you can see it's sort of like a heat map, right? So why did they change it? They just changed it because they didn't want it to be as this is sort of like one or the other, right? You're in it or you're not in it, right? They wanted to sort of represent it as it's not just a simple, it's a spectrum, right? And so it's not just a simple you're in or out, and you've got room for negotiation in it a little bit. The numbers are relatively the same except for it's a 14-day average. Why do they want to do that? They want to capture a period in time, as opposed to a just short, isolated period of time. So that's kind of that's kind of what they've used or are using. They're asking our public officials and medical officials to actually use this. So if I'm having discussions with them, this is kind of the sort of graphic that we'll be looking at. For the moment, I've just, you'll forgive me because this is the original one before they come out with it, but I've just used this, but it is the same thing as this. So you can see for the new cases, we're currently at 0.79 or 11 cases over the past 14 days that were reportable. So you can see that we're clearly increasing there, and that's the indicators have been increasing. They've been increasing across Connecticut. They've been increasing across Fairfield County, and that continues to be one of the secondary metrics here, as you can see from this. And I'll just go to that right now. Again, I get a little high that comes to green, but there you go.
Just to be clear, I did get some questions today. We have been in yellow. We have existed in yellow since school opened. So the idea that we're in yellow shouldn't shock anyone or be new. That is the status the day we opened in hybrid even. Yellow is the status of the pandemic, and you progress through the spectrum from there.
So that the Fairfield indicator was down at 6 the last time, 6.4. Connecticut was 7.9. So you can clearly see there's a increase across the county and even within the town. And so we continue to monitor that, but currently we're still in that section that would indicate that we should be considering in-person learning. But we continue to monitor that, and again, it's a very fluid situation.
Okay.
Mr. Simi.
I think the confusion comes, there's a new heat map, town by town, like literally a geographic map.
Yeah.
That has now, I don't know, beige, yellow, orange,
Yeah.
red. So maybe that's the.
Yeah, I just wanted to allay people's fears of the sense of, oh no, we're in yellow.
Yeah.
We've been in yellow, we're managing yellow. Hopefully we stay in yellow, but
Again, those might not reconcile on colors. It's kind
yes,
of the point.
between colors and grass.
Maps and.
We got to get a color spectrum agreed upon across every level. Mrs. Ritchie.
So I just want to go back to our map. I mean, you don't have to go back to it on the screen, but so right now, just so everybody is clear where we are in yellow. We're pretty soundly in yellow right now. We currently have 0.79 or 11 cases. We would need to go above 2.2 or above 15 to shift to orange. And then even if we do shift to orange, we would, as a district, make a decision if that would indicate that we would go to a hybrid model.
Or yes.
Okay, so it doesn't, just because we're easing, I don't want to say we're easing towards orange, but if we get to that just orange place, it doesn't mean we're automatically going to switch to remote. It's sort of.
No, you reassess the situation, yes.
Okay, with the public health department.
Correct.
Okay, great.
I thought it, Mr. Williams, your hand up?
No.
Okay. All right, moving forward. Everybody good? Jill has a question. Oh, I can't see Jill.
I'll keep an eye out on it.
Mrs. McCammon.
Thank you, Katie. I appreciate that, and Tara. So Alan, just to summarize, one of the things you, see, make sure I understand, one of the things you said at the beginning is that one of the things that the State Department of Education and the Department of Health have come out and said is that school is one of the safest places to be because of the mitigation strategies that are in place. So that whereas originally there was a much more structured process where we would move more quickly into potentially hybrid or remote situations. Now, because of the belief that school on a relative basis is safe, they've tried to build more flexibility into your local decision making so that you can decide if you need to adjust your local environment, but they haven't necessarily dictated that when you get to a certain threshold, you must respond in a certain way. Is that correct?
Jill, I think you just broke up at the end, but I think I got the gist of it. I don't know about more flexibility, because it's the same sort of process, but certainly perhaps not as rigid, right, a decision as is probably as most accurate as I could describe it. But the collaborative process of triangulating the data, understanding what's happening in the community, what's the state of readiness in the schools, all of those things are also part of the ongoing discussion once we have to sort of make that discussion or make that decision.
Mr. Brown.
Dr. Adler, just quickly, it talks about statistically significant changes. Did we get any guidance as to how to interpret that, or does the health department inform us statistically significant is? How does that act?
Yeah, well, they will look at these percent of positivity rates and make that determination from those.
I'm sorry, who's they in this case?
Oh, sorry, our medical advisor and director of health.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Further questions? Okay, thank you, Dr. Adley. Reopening of schools, and at this point, it just might be current state of schools going forward will remain our number one issue, I perceive, going into the rest of this year. But we will move on to the presentation of student distribution class size, some of our regular work for the high school and Middlesex. Mrs. Dunn and Mrs. Summers are here.
Good evening. I think
Ellen.
Hi, how are you? Good evening, everyone. I will introduce Paul's portion of the presentation. And before I do that, I wanted to take a moment to recognize both Paul Ribeiro and Megan Emanuelson for the work with the administrative team this summer in preparation for opening school with an altered master schedule. As you know, we do our best to have the schedule done every year before we dismiss in June. And indeed, the schedule was fairly complete at that point. Guidance counselors had met with students, selections had been made, and we had the challenge of taking that master schedule with an 8-day rotation and 7 periods meeting every day and converting it into a functioning block schedule with mini periods and some real creativity. Paul then was able to take the schedule that was already built and convert it into the schedule that we work with now, which saved a tremendous amount of work that had already been done, and also the selections that our students had made for their coursework for this year. So I wanted you to understand that and understand the transition that had taken place there. In addition to that, the work of balancing that he and Megan did as we prepared to open school was extremely important this year as we were working for the safest possible classroom settings for our high school students. So it has been a labor of love and care for our students and staff, and I want to recognize that. And I think the report reflects that work. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Ribeiro to share the details.
Thank you, Mrs. Dunn. And I'm just going to share my screen here so we can see the report. Here we go. Can everyone see the report?
Yes.
Yes, we can see Mr. Rivera.
Okay, great, thank you. So again, thank you again for having me here tonight. When I started doing this report a couple weeks ago to collect the data, I realized that the last time that I presented this was back in March. It was the same night that Dr. Adley ended up closing schools, which ended up being for the rest of the school year. So I'm hoping that me presenting tonight isn't a sign of things to come. So the report is very similar to what you saw back in March. Our first table here has a breakdown of the courses by content area and the size of them, with the averages over to the right highlighted in yellow. Our overall class size average for our 5 major content areas is 17 students. I do want to point out there is one clerical error on here under the math category. The column that is 20 to 24 students per class, that number should actually be 30. And the one that is higher than 24, that number should be 1. We have 1 class at 25 in our math department. But the rest of the data is there. And then below are our electives, PE classes, special education, and other academic support courses. The next chart talks about our overall, I would say, the load that each teacher has as far as number of students that they have and the average for each content area. So again, you can see the averages highlighted in yellow for this year, in addition to the differences between the previous couple of years. The next chart breaks down the overall class sizes by below 16, between 16 and 20, and above 20. The column or the row that is by far the highest this year is the 16 to 20 with 56%. Add that to the one that is below 16. It brings our overall total of classes 20 or below to 78% of our classes being run at the high school this year, which is a big change from previous years. Next is our overall number of what we would consider quote unquote small classes. So these are classes running under 10. And again, we have that number at 16 this year, which is definitely lower than what we had in previous years, a slight change from last year. But again, lower than the years before that. And our next one talks about our large classes. And again, as I pointed out in the first slide, this one, there's a slight error in the 25 students, that row. There should be a number 1 in the fall of 2021. And then down below in the math category, there should be 1 for that 1 BC calculus class that's at 25. And then the last chart that we have here for the high school talks about the overall counselor load for our school counselors, which is currently standing at 173, which is the average, which has been consistent for the past couple of years. Once we added the additional counselor back in 2017, 2018. So that number has definitely been consistent and puts us very comparable, if not significantly better than a lot of our counterparts in Durgay and Fairfield County. So now I'll turn it over to Shelley to discuss the Middlesex school portion of the presentation.
Why don't we take high school questions first, and then we'll move to the middle school? Are there questions on the high school class distribution? Mr. Deneen.
Mr. Ribeiro, on the classes under 10, what's the average size of those classes? It's 6 or 7. What's the smallest?
Yeah, it would be, I don't have the average for it off the top of my head, but it's about that. Some of them might be a little bit smaller. These are some more of our specialized classes. Some of them are some of our courses that are like a final continuation, like an AP French class, like the last course that they would take in the sequence of taking classes. So, they range in there, but I don't have the exact average.
I like the trend on the guidance counselors, and I think this council load, we've invested in that over the last couple of years. I think that's probably been very helpful as we've gone through this difficult COVID challenge. Just high level, where do we stand at an average of 173 to other schools in our area?
Again, when looking at Fairfield County, we are at one of the best as far as the average is one of the lower ones that we have. Overall for the state, we are definitely much lower than the rest of the state. But even within Fairfield County, we are very competitive, if not one of the lower ones as far as the average caseload. And again, like you pointed out, that just helps so much more when it comes to our school counselors making those positive relationships with our students, especially during these difficult times during the pandemic. And I'm sure Shelley's going to say something similar when it comes time for her to talk about the school counselors at Middlesex with their caseloads. But it's extremely good and extremely appreciative.
Thank you.
Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, so a question on the distribution of class size. I like the trend going down from, it's been 40 or around 40, even up to 49 of greater than 20, and now it's down to 22%. How did you accomplish that?
So there were some mitigating factors that we took this year when it came to trying to social distance with some of our classes. We definitely wanted to try to maintain the 3 feet within the classroom. So we made efforts to try to keep those classes smaller. One of the things that we did was for some of our team taught classes where we have 2 content area teachers that are teaching, we separated those courses. So instead of having a group of 23 kids with 2 teachers, we would separate those out and have 2 classes with 1 teacher each that maybe had 13 kids or 14 kids in there. Still providing a smaller student to teacher ratio, but as a typical course to offer that extra support, but not have the larger class size by having 2 teachers in there. Another thing that we did was in our science areas, we are not running our science labs this year, partially because of the restrictions that were in place by the health experts. It was becoming increasingly difficult to run some of our science labs with students working together collaboratively, with students sharing materials. So it was extremely restrictive. Our science teachers are doing more demonstrations and leading students in lab exercises that way, which they're able to fit in with our 85-minute block periods. But because our science teachers did not have a lab, they're able to teach 5 classes rather than 4 when they did have the lab. So that has helped lower the class sizes in science also.
So it sounds like, Mr. Rivera, that we should not be surprised as a board if we have some increase in class size, hopefully next year when this is over, but when the COVID pandemic, because some of these small class sizes are definitely COVID related, correct?
Yeah, we definitely took some mitigation with trying to lower the class sizes to help with the social distancing within the classrooms.
Thank you. Mr. Maroney. Mrs. Ritchie.
Thank you so much, Paul. You always do such a great job, and I appreciate all your hard work. And my question is about the team classes. So you've split them into 2. Are the teachers moving between those 2 groups? So they're just teaching those smaller groups? Because typically the teachers would take turns teaching the classes when they were in the same room. So now are those teachers just focusing on their group of 13, 14 students, or are they switching off those classes? Are they now just individual classes?
Yeah, they're focusing on their group of students. They're not switching off with their former team teacher.
Mr. Burke.
Following up on Mr. Deneen's point with regard to the counselor student load, I'm also pleased to see that number dropping. My question is, considering the nature of our community and how much we expect out of those counselors, do we have enough?
If Megan were here, she would probably say no. But I would say, we're looking at next year. We have an increased enrollment projected, which will become part of the budget process of, I think, about 80 students for next year. And so that may be some piece of the conversation going forward.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much, Mrs. Dunn and Mr. Ribeiro, for this thorough report. We appreciate it, and have a good night. And we'll move to Mrs. Summers.
Thank you.
Okay, Thanks, Paul. I have to, good evening, everyone. I have to echo Ellen's sentiments. Working with Dana and Mary on reconstructing the master schedule based on cohorts and the availability of space, and the various sizes of rooms at our school proved to be quite a challenge, but one that we feel we have conquered and done a really good job in splitting up kids in order to maintain social distancing guidelines. So though our average class size dropped, that's because of cohorting, and we had to have 2 teams with 5 cohorts. Most of our teams had 4, but in order to accommodate the numbers and find the right space for them, we added 5 cohorts for 2 teams at each grade level. So that meant that we added sections, and thus the average class size dropped to 19.8, which is, you know, in keeping with the other years, but a bit lower. Okay, go ahead, Paul. Our large and small classes, you'll see that in world language, we have 5 classes. What this really is that we have 5 students who are taking an advanced level course. Prior to COVID, we had planned a different structure of offering that course, but because of the constraints of cohorts and space, once again, these students are taking an online advanced course in a world language, and they're each listed as their own separate course. So it's really 5 students in one class. It's not 5 classes of students. We also had an over in 1 math. It just was over because that's just how it worked out with cohorting, and 1 English as well. And our class load is very much, the trend has stayed the same for teachers. We have additional teachers teaching 5 classes this year based on the cohorts, and some of our plans, of course, had to change based on cohorting and because of COVID. But pretty much the trend has stayed the same, as has, you can go to the next slide, as has the trend with our counselors. We have 1 counselor who's the lead counselor, who comes in a little bit less than the others, but he has additional responsibilities of scheduling and planning, so we decided to keep that as it is. So I think we did a good job in working out cohorts of students and in keeping them in one class. Our teachers rotate between classes rather than the students rotate, and it seems to be working well.
Board questions? Can you just go back to that counselor slide for me?
Jill's got her hand up.
Oh, Mrs. McCammon.
A question about the world languages. Those classes. Sure, Shelley.
Jill,
Can you hear me?
Yes. That's better, yeah.
Okay. I had a question about the world language classes, the small classes.
Mm-hmm.
Shelley, I'm not sure I understood. Are they 5 children who are, or students, excuse me, who are taking classes outside of our normal curriculum?
Correct. They're taking an online advanced level course. They either came in with more language, native speakers, and really had gone through the curriculum that we offered. We had a plan to coordinate and align the course with the high school pre-COVID, but obviously that couldn't happen. So the best solution was an online course. Certainly there's a teacher there to assist and answer questions and help. But those, in that breakdown, it looks like there's 5 classes, but it's really each student is counted as his or her own class. So there's 5 students, they work together for most of the time, not together, they're independently on their Chromebooks, and they're working through an online course.
Thank you. And do they take it at the same time, or it's according to their own schedules?
It's according to their schedule. So in a couple of instances, there's 2 at one time, but pretty much they're according to their own schedule with a teacher check-in, of course.
Thank you very much.
I've answered my own guidance counselor questions. Are there any other questions? All right, thank you, Mrs. Summers, for this thorough report. We appreciate it and have a good night.
Thanks.
Madam Chair, may I just say just publicly to particularly our high school and our middle school staff, I mean, those are huge schools to try and solve the problems creatively around space and cohort. And they didn't leave a stone unturned in terms of any resources we had to be as creative as possible. And just publicly tonight, I just want to recognize them and thank them first. Thank you.
No, I would say it was a Herculean effort, and we thank you for doing it so quickly. And in fact, as the administration continues its budget conversations, I would love for you to consider any lessons learned or anything about this having to recreate a whole new schedule. If there's benefits of that, I'm sure the board would love to hear that as we go into budget season.
May I ask just another question, just procedure-wise? Does the board want to receive the plethora of class sizes, or is this the summary just quite enough moving forward?
No, I would recommend the board continue. There have been times that has caused significant questions. I would recommend that the board continue.
I just want
receive it.
to, okay, I'm just, all right.
We don't have them this year, but the board has looked at section sizing controls, whether we've needed to add staff because of section sizing, and this report has always been quite helpful.
Okay.
Unless anyone on the board feels differently. A lot of paper, you could look digitally. I just know it is definitely has been of issue looking at history and English classes, math needs in the past. So I would recommend the board at least take another turn at this before they decide to get rid of it outside of this COVID year. Moving forward, we will move on to the discussion and possible action on the 2021-22 consolidated federal grants. Mr. Tranberg.
Good evening. There is a memorandum in the packet that provides a summary of the consolidated federal grants, titles 1, 2, 3, and 4 that have been submitted to the state. There is a grid that articulates really reflects a decrease in funding of the consolidated titles 1 and 2. That number is based on Darien's annual census poverty estimates, as well as adjusted allocations that are made to the state. And it's usually a combination of those two things that make for the number that you see. We have Title I funds continues to support one of our interventionists, and as well as some technology for our remote learning and some professional development as well. Title II is designated exclusively for professional development, and we are using that money to support some of our relationship with Teachers College, as well as our social emotional learning work, and again, meeting and supporting teachers' needs in the various learning models of in-person, hybrid, and remote. Our Title III funds are intended for supporting our EL population. Those funds have gone up over the years because our EL population has gone up, as well as the allocation to support that. And Title IV is the newest consolidated grant that we qualify for. So over the past few years, that's focused on our health and our PE curriculum, developing that, as well as the units and the lessons to support our PE and health teachers. And those are the plans to continue with that this year.
Questions? Mr. Berg.
Are any of the title applications, do they ask any information about the diversity of our faculty or staff?
They do not. So the way the consolidated federal grants work is the money is allocated to us based on the data that we provide through all kinds of means, but that is not one of them. And we're really filing an application to get the money that we've been allocated.
Mr. Morelli.
Yes, so last budget cycle, we had questions on the English learning teachers, and just a question with an influx of people moving from out of state or so we've heard into it. Do we have a need for that in this budget calendar year?
I plan to propose that position in my budget this year.
So going forward, we don't need one for 2021.
For right now, no.
Okay, thank you.
So in terms of consolidated grants, we've worked hard to pull staff out of grants, and so we would look to hear that in a budget discussion.
Yeah, so that one position that's living in Title I, as that salary is going up in that line each year and our number is going down, that's
Probably not.
obviously not the way we want it to go.
Which is why we've tried over the last 5 years to really pull people out of that. Any other questions around consolidated grants? So we approve the grant.
Okay, so
Request.
we're approving the request, but it seems like you've already put the request through. Is that correct?
Yeah, the deadline was beginning of October.
So usually we see them a little before the deadline.
Okay, so we're-
The timeline seems different this year. They usually is around this time, so I think it might have been how it's been
Yeah.
synced. However, with that said, we can make any adjustments to the grant if there are questions
So,
or.
and the reason why we approve is these grants are specific needs, so the board needs to be aware of the needs that we're applying for as a Board of Education. So we could always pull all those grant applications if anyone saw an objection to these grant numbers, but typically this season is a little different that they're in. So had anyone if anyone had concerns about this, the grant applications would go, but we do need to approve these applications.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that they've already been submitted. So we're approving them after they've been submitted. But we can pull them if we need to.
Pulled if there's
Okay, I just want to clarification. Thank you.
So if there are no other questions, and given the timing of things, I'm going to ask for a motion to approve the grant applications as described in the memo dated October 22nd, 2020. Mr. Burke so moves, Mr. Roney seconds, all in favor, and that is unanimous. Thank you, everybody. Great. We will move on to discussion on September 2021 financial report and possible action on proposed budget transfers. Mr. Rudel.
So this is the financial report through September. We are projecting a deficit of just over $2.1 million, which is about a 2% deficit to our budget. As you can see, it is largely due to the reopening expenditures, which are at $2.6 million. The general education RCs are forecasting a positive $426,000. The special education RCs forecasting a positive $128,000. This kind of reiterates the slide that Alan shared earlier, but the operating fund has $2.6 million of COVID-related reopening expenditures. We do have grants of $482,000 for a total spend of just over $3.1 million. Backing out the grants of $482,000, and then we do have some transfers before the board today of $315,000, brings the net spend to just over $2.3 million. We did want to highlight some of the changes from the last financial report to this financial report. We did have a reduction in forecasted benefits for some of the positions in the COVID RC. That brought it down by about $99,000. Obviously, we discussed at the last board meeting the additional staff of campus monitors, lunch monitors, and technicians. That increased it by a little over $500,000. We did add contracted services for cleaning. That increased it by about $366,000. We did add some facility-related expenditures, including plexiglass, desk shields, exhaust fan repair, storage, and PPEs, and police services at the middle school at Oxford. The YMCA costs, and then again, we have those proposed transfers of $315,000. So the salaries are in a negative variance of $888,324. We do have positive salary savings in K-5 enrollment of $262,900 for under-enrolled sections, and those are items that we are recommending for transfer tonight. Rental custodial overtime is a positive $13,400. The weight room $6,200 positive, intramurals positive $3,500. Those are really COVID-related savings. Salary savings and turnover are a positive $122,800. Contract support, some of our settled contracts came in under budget, and so the savings of a little over $36,000. And then reopening costs, salaries are negative $1.3 million. Operating is also negative, just over $1 million. Again, this is really the reopening expenditures. Those operating expenditures are just over 1.1. We offer a transfer unrelated to COVID in repairs and service for technology, and that's really related to repair of Chromebooks. That's causing a deficit of $10,000. Music transportation is a positive $6,000, and non-public tuition a positive $150,000. Fixed is the one area of a positive category in the budget of $10,229. Regular transportation is a positive balance, and that is due to the school year being shortened from 180 to 177 days. Property insurance, workers' comp, student accident insurance also all show a positive balance. We did discuss this at Finance Committee. Unemployment insurance is forecasted at a negative $60,000. There were a change to Unemployment rules that allowed individuals who did not work in summer school due to the virtual nature to collect unemployment. So we have seen a spike in unemployment claims, and then our utilities are slightly positive. Equipment is a deficit of $154,000. That again relates to reopening expenditures. Revenue is forecasted to be short about $78,000. We are seeing a decline in building rental revenue as we are not renting out our facilities. However, we did see a spike in field rental revenue. Given the nature of area and summer school being virtual, we were able to rent out our fields. Summer school exceeded expectations by about $20,000. And we do have a shortage in ELP tuition. We have less students than expected. So the transfers for tonight, we are recommending transferring $66,169 to cover the COVID section at Hindley, the health insurance for that teacher at Hindley for $9,000, $113,025 to cover the COVID section at Holmes, $63,396 to cover the 5th grade Tokenique section, which was a COVID section, the health insurance for that COVID section at $9,000, and then $54,396 to cover the COVID section at Royal, and then the one non-COVID section transfer, as I mentioned earlier, is $10,000 for additional funds to repair Chromebooks. If transfers are approved, we would cover 4 of the 7 teachers that were added.
Question. So I just wanted to bring up the transfer, the broad category designated as COVID. I mean, that really is a salary transfer. And technically, I don't think our broad categories have changed in terms of the statutes. But since we're being as transparent as we possibly can, and even though it's salary to salary, I think it is a good idea to highlight those transfers and have the board approve them because they are directly related to COVID. So I just wanted to make sure that in normal times, if there's movement between within that category, we don't typically see that transfer, but because they are COVID related, we're bringing them to the board for approval.
I think that's probably a wise idea. The statutes never contemplated a COVID RC, so best in this situation. I agree with you that we're fully transparent and everyone sees where we're moving the money around. So. Any other questions? Mr. Sini.
I'm not sure this falls in the right category, but at the Finance Committee meeting, we talked about the timing to request the appropriation from the Board of Finance. I don't know when you want to.
No, I just wanted to see if people had questions on the report, and then I could address what we discussed at Finance Committee.
Okay.
So just as long as there's no other questions on the actual report, we can talk about what we discussed at Finance Committee, which is I just questioned based on the Board of Finance meeting, and as Tara stated earlier, it wasn't really clear in terms of timing. It seemed flexible. What I wanted to understand from the committee is what their sense of what they felt the timing would be appropriate. We did ask Rich, I guess, what would be the last possible time we would need to get an appropriation, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you said April.
So you'd probably want to start it end of April to kind of have it wrapped up by May. Your biggest.
We need to start it earlier.
So well, here's the problem with that. I have faith in the Board of Finance, but on the off chance that we don't get the full appropriation, we would have to make some cuts to our existing budget. So I want to be sure that we have enough time on the off chance that we're faced with not getting that full appropriation, that we can make the adjustments that we need to so that we are living within our actual appropriation. So I asked the committee, and it seemed to me that most people felt the process should start probably sometime late January, early February, so that we could have that appropriation and know what that appropriation is in case we need to make some adjustments to our budget.
So my suggestion would be this, because I just don't think, the wheels of bureaucracy sometimes move that quickly between April to May. And in terms of this appropriation, if passed by the Board of Finance, would most likely involve the RTM. So you're also gathering that 100 people to make a decision. Why don't we sit down and come up with a proposed both financial calendar, so we make sure we're making the most of our appropriation, and we look at the town's calendar and come back to the board next meeting with a suggested timeline based on all those factors. We can then put it out to Chairman Zagrodzky and Seth Morton as moderator of the RTM and see if they have any concerns or issues about it. But then at least we all have a roadmap that we're working with, and then we'll be as nimble as we can within that. But I agree, we'll probably have to start the process early, just for a matter of meeting schedules and things that can happen.
There were a couple other points made at our meeting and even in public comment, in that, you know, we're going to start our regular budget process also. And, you know, as we see, some things sometimes get conflated, one and the other. So if we could even, you know, I would encourage us, if possible, you know, not late January, but early January, to try to move it out of the way. And again, if that's possible, but I think that was some points raised at our meeting as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm of the feeling I'd like to put numbers as forward as possible, but I also understand the other town bodies saying we'd like to see what your savings are, what your costs are. So I think it'll be a little bit of a partnership in trying to both not confuse it with the budget, this year's appropriation. I think all the points made are really valid. So the best thing probably do is put together a proposed schedule, come back to this board, and then send it out to the other boards. Sound good to everybody?
So you're asking the finance committee to come up with the schedule? Or
Nope,
the
I am
administration?
asking probably the finance chair, the superintendent, Mr. Rudel, and myself to sit down and come back to the board so that we can get their thoughts and then get it out. Sound good?
Does anyone on the committee want to add anything to that for our discussion the other day?
I mean, I think you encapsulated our conversation accurately. I mean, there was concern about getting our hands around the appropriation as quickly as possible to give everybody enough time to vet it. And also, if you know, I think we also spoke about it, if there would be a need for even a second appropriation. So the sooner that we have the first one squared away, the better. And it may well take the discipline of thinking about two budgets at the same time, but we're in a crisis, and if we have to do that, then we have to do that.
And I would, just for the board's contemplation for next meeting, I would add in that the earlier we go, the more likely we're looking at tranches and multiple appropriations, which is not a problem, but more likely we would receive a piece than may ask to reassess and receive a second piece. Okay, so with that, may I entertain a motion to approve the proposed budget transfers as stated in the memo presented by Mr. Rudel? Mr. Sini so moves, Mr. Maroney seconds, all in favor. That is unanimous. Thank you, everybody. We will move on to discussion and possible acceptance of contemplated gifts from the Oxbridge PTO and Corbin Cares. I'd like to separate them. I'd like to update you on the Corbin Cares one. But let's take the Oxbridge PTO one first.
Thank you to our Oxbridge PTO. They're looking to purchase 3 picnic tables, basically to support the outdoor luncheons of students and opportunities for staff and kids to sit outside, essentially. This was barely over the 2,000 that probably in some cases could have got it under it. But anyway, it's just about over the 2,000 mark. So I'll just bring it before you. I've just already discussed this with Dr. Forshaw.
Any questions? A thank you to our PTOs for their generosity as always on this. With that, may I entertain a motion to approve the contemplated gift as outlined in the form from the Oxbridge PTO to Oxbridge School? Mr. Maroney so moves, Mrs. Stein seconds, all in favor. That is unanimous. Thank you, everybody. Okay, Corbin Cares. This is a little bit different than we typically have. So this says Corbin Cares, but because David Genovese actually approached Mrs. Stein. I'm not sure everyone knows how integral Mrs. Stein was in getting Corbin Cares off the ground during the pandemic. He had been approached by Greg Bay, who is a parent in our school system, who had gathered some dads and dads doing good. And they had been kind of supplying lunches to teachers at the school. So Mr. Bay and Mr. Genovese wondered out loud how they could do this more formally. They called Mrs. Stein, who then called me. And I think Corbin Cares, looking with other organizations would like to thank our teachers, much like they thanked first responders during the pandemic, with regular luncheons in a more stylized way. Corbin Cares is a great vehicle. Today really gets a lot of credit for being the energy behind this, but Corbin Cares is a great vehicle because they already have connections with restaurants and the health department in making sure we could assure our staffs that if the community of Darien really was going to extend this, that everything being brought in was safe and up to code. So this would be to all the schools. It looks at this point, they'd be looking to do it once a month as a thank you to teachers and also to support our local businesses. They would be looking to include local businesses that they are managing. They have the relationship we are not defining, although we did ask them to please consider Chartwells, because Chartwells has done a great job for us this year. And maybe just once in the rotation, think of someone who had been working in our schools. So I think that's, again, for their contemplation and consideration. So this does not have an actual dollar amount on it yet, but I thought it was necessary for the board to be aware of. It is a consumable. It is not something lasting, but they will go out and fundraise money with this being their goal. So if there are any objections of board members of them doing this, I thought the time to hear it now, but I think Mr. Bay and his group of dads who have kind of been doing this quietly and Corbin Cares are really looking mostly to say thank you and letting the community of Darien find a way to say thank you that we as a district, given kind of our financial pressures, couldn't do at this point. So I think the approval right now is to let them go forward, and more details will unfold on how that goes forward. Any questions? Mr. Senior.
I would just request that, we get an update on a dollar amount at some point.
Yeah,
This is
I think they have to
extremely
fundraise
generous.
for it, yeah. So as soon as we have it, and they wanted to go out and fundraise for it, but I didn't want them out fundraising for something the board didn't know about. Mrs. Ritchie.
Just for clarification, since there is no dollar amount, we're not approving the gift itself. We're approving the process to begin
Yes.
eventually finding out what that dollar amount is.
Yes, we're approving that they have the ability to go out and do this, but we will get regular updates on how much money is coming into the school system. And as always, this would show up at the end of the year report that Mr. Rula provides us of outside organizations that have put money into the district. But given that they wanted to do this during the pandemic, they asked if we could expedite. And I thought that that was a way to say thank you to our teachers, and the board would be willing to consider. Mr. Stein?
And the dollar amount will be based on a head count. When we did Corbin Cares, meals were a certain dollar amount per meal. So it will range from schools, depending on, as Tara said, what they're going to plan on doing once a month, but based on head counts in schools, the dollar numbers will vary.
So if there's 80 employees at one school versus 90 at another, you'll see a variance, but they're also
So it's not an equity issue, it's a per person cost for their meals.
And it's monthly at every school.
Yes.
And are we going to see eventually just one large gift coming to the board, a dollar amount, or?
I think at the end of the year, we'll see total dollars, but we'll get a regular update. I think once they get a feel for how much, once they talk to vendors who want to participate, that they have the relationships with, what it will be. So we can get that update, but they have to do a cycle in order to do an update. So if there's no objection, we can let them go, but I'd like to approve that they go out on this adventure. And then we can follow up with dollar amounts and if there's any questions, unless there's objection. Okay, so with that,
thank you.
Yes, a big thank you to Mr. Habay, who had this idea, who talked to Mr. Genovese and have hit the ground faster than I could get this to the board. With that, may I entertain a motion to approve? Mrs. Stein and Mr. Burke, all in favor? And that is unanimous. Thank you. All right, we will move on to discussion and possible board action on proposed policies. C19 concerning health and safety relating to the pandemic, policy 5300, policy 5130, policy 1250, policy 1225, policy 1200, 520, 5220, one of my favorites, and a repeal and replace of 5220. Mr. Burke and Mrs. Sion.
Thank you. As mentioned earlier, the policy committee reviewed each of the aforementioned policies at its meeting on October 23rd. What I would propose is we'll go through each of them and we can make a determination if you're ready to vote on them, fine, or push them over, depending on the wishes of the board. The first one, C19 policy concerning health and safety protocols. This is you'll recall the C policies are all COVID related. They all would expire on June 30th. This one relates to health and safety protocols. We are empowering the superintendent, or directing the superintendent to create health and safety protocols related to COVID in accordance with federal, state, local statutes, and directing that compliance with this, whatever policies they develop, is mandatory for all individuals on school property. There's nothing in particular that is specific. This is just enabling legislation, if you will, allowing the superintendent to proceed much as he has been under his emergency powers that we had granted to him previously. So I don't, this was pretty straightforward for the committee. I don't know if there are any board questions.
Mike, this, correct me if I'm wrong, this is the administration is allowed to make safety protocols and what we often talk about, operational decisions through empowerment only. So this is just doing the very same thing as it relates to COVID.
That is correct.
Okay. Deb, do you want to take them one by one? Or
No.
do you want to take them as a group?
No,
Why don't we
but-
go through them, and if we can get them through as a group, we'll take them as a group.
Just a point of order, our policies say we have to have 2 weeks of read on these, right, 2 meetings.
We had last, did we brought,
I mean, there have been times where we've approved policies on a first read, and there are other times where we've made the determination to put it over for a second read if there are questions, or sometimes if members wanted additional times. I will note that, I mean, we have been very aggressive in trying to get policies done in our COVID environment. We brought a lot last time, we're bringing a number tonight. The policy committee met on Friday, so this is a rather short run up for approval. So I think certainly if there are members who feel they need additional time, that would be appropriate. I think some of these policies are rather self-evident. Some may merit additional thinking depending on the particular member. So it's a long-winded way of saying I think we should go them through one at a time, see if people feel comfortable voting or feel that they want more time. So, with regard to this initial policy, C19, do we feel that comfortable moving ahead and voting, or do?
Well, I guess I wasn't prepared to vote given our policy, and it is lengthy, and I'm not trying to get in the way here, but one of my questions were all the COVID, and I think you covered this. I tried to watch the meeting, but any of the COVID related things, do they grandfather? Are they there forever? Do they?
No, they'll
expire?
expire. They'll expire on June 30th.
they expire this June 30th?
This June 30th.
This
Yeah,
C-
so
I'm sorry, this C series, just because we're all talking, this C series expires no matter what, June 30th.
Okay.
Any of these C series would have, should the board choose to then make them regular policy, or should the pandemic continue, they would have to be re-voted on.
okay, so they do sunset automatically.
Yes.
Okay.
They revert to their
Yeah.
prior form.
Yeah. So my understanding, because Mr. Sini is correct, usually we do have 2 reads, is that because they're now handing down these COVID policies, it's so that we can act in this environment. So I would need to hear from the board if they are opposed to some of these. This one we already actually are doing in practice. The question is, are you, because we've been doing this in practice since last spring.
I'm comfortable voting on this one.
Okay,
Me
Mr.
too.
Brown? Mr. Burke?
I'm comfortable voting on this.
Mrs. Stein?
I'm not.
No.
And again, it's just following policy, wasn't defined as an emergency, and that's where I'm going with it.
Mr. Maroney?
I am
Mr.
not.
Deneen? Okay, given that there are concerns regarding policy and the policy is a second read, we will hold till
Jill.
next meeting.
Jill.
Oh, Jill, I'm sorry. Jill, how do you feel? Are you comfortable voting or you'd like to hold?
I think we have to follow our policy, and I think it says emergency, so, you know, I think policy dictates, not my comfort level.
Right, then maybe as a point of convenience, if we're not going to vote for these tonight, board members have these. They have the ability to read them. To the extent that board members have questions about these policies for the administration, then they should be brought forward in rapid fashion. What I'd like to avoid is having at the next meeting these policies come again, then there be questions, and then having to put it over for that. For
No,
those
I think
reasons.
next meeting we will be prepared to vote. I think where you're seeing a divide of the board is the pandemic is in itself an emergency and has been designated that. So some people are ready to put forward the C policies. Other people want a second read. They're defining emergency as something different. I think with an urgency, it's the level of urgency board members are feeling with this. So let's do this. Let's go through them. The board has had them and has had a chance to read them. We will ask questions, but I would ask all members of the board to be prepared to vote next meeting, because at that point it will be tied, because these COVID policies only last till June 30th, and we are being asked to consider them so that we can act within this environment.
So I would just add to that, you should ask your questions. We should have a full discussion this evening so that if there are any concerns that you have with the specific policy, that they're not brought up when we vote on them at the next meeting.
Yes. So with the first policy, those that, questions, Mr. Brown.
I'm sorry. I mean, people have been through these. People, I think, want to look at them again. I'm not sure I would have full discussion with people one more time. I agree with Mr. Burke's point that we should definitely forward on questions to the administration, but I'm not quite sure how that works mechanically. We have full discussion when everyone may have further questions.
Well, that's what we're doing, right? We've had them, we're prepared to discuss them tonight. So are there any questions? And I think we can have a full discussion on them because we've had them to read. So are there any questions on this first policy? Seeing no questions.
All right, the
Mr. Burke.
second policy, 5300 C19, policy relating to student use of district computer systems and electronic communications. As you can see, this policy really addresses the fact that our students are going to be on their computers for a greater period of time, greater access, and it re-emphasizes the discipline and requirements of using computer technology in the COVID environment. Again, it's a C policy. Are there any questions concerning this policy?
Mr. Cheney.
So again, I'm sorry. So anything that's in red will be eliminated as of June 30. June
Yeah.
30?
Yeah.
And it will revert back to the black writing?
Yeah.
Okay.
However,
Unless we choose to adopt.
Unless there,
Right.
Yes, we discussed last meeting that we may choose to adopt, but everything reverts back to normal policy June 30.
Okay.
Our current policy.
So that's why I wasn't ready to vote, because I didn't understand what we're doing. I apologize.
Any questions on this policy? Again, I would say this is pretty much what we are doing already.
Jill has a question.
Mr. Brown,
Jill, wait,
Mr.
sorry.
Brown.
You go first, won't you?
No, it was for Jill. So I couldn't
Oh,
see her
Jill,
hand.
okay.
You were Jill.
Mr. Brown.
Thank you. We had discussed briefly in policy, there was a question about when users access our devices or access our network, is there a pop-up? They have to have an acknowledgement. And do we have language? Can we just see that language, make sure it complies with the policy and we're in alignment between the two? And just whatever the record retentions are. So I know you're going to get back to me on that. If you haven't yet, that's fine. I guess we have more time, but that would just be a follow-up between now and the next reading.
So we have an acceptable use agreement that students and staff sign. I can forward that to you, but it does it is in line with the policy.
So as a follow-up, do they just sign a slip of paper at say the start of the year before they use our resources, or is this every time you log in? And my question for that is, if we had a third party access our network or systems, we wouldn't have, if it's something they sign at the beginning of the year, we wouldn't capture that. So how do we do that operationally?
So staff clicks on that agreement to the acceptable use policy each time. I don't know if students do the same, but I assume it's the same login and security, but we can check.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Mrs. McCammon.
I'm just toggling windows. Thank you. So there's some language in here. I read the summary. Thank you. I'm just not clear on some of the changes in language. Marge, would you mind just walking through just why we've made each of those changes?
So Shipman and Goodwin, because they're attorneys and I used to be one, whenever they change a policy, they make stylistic changes. So some of these are just stylistic. And so I adopted some of them. The only ones that really, I'm sorry, Jill, I'm just getting to that policy. So the one that applies here, it's just at the end of the policy, to the extent practicable when students are using board-owned computers or devices and board-provided internet access. So it's the students taking our devices home and using our platforms that this is meant to cover. The other red in that initial policy were stylistic changes, which those can sunset, as well with these COVID changes.
Thank you. So when students have devices that are their own, that's still covered in this policy.
It is.
Okay, thank you.
So also you can see in the regulations that follow, there's the distinction between access to the district's computer system when students are physically present on school property and then when students are engaged in remote learning.
Thank you.
Mr. Sweeney.
Do we want to recolor the stylistics so then we can differentiate what sunsets and what we might not want to sunset?
I'll take the stylistic out. How's that? Because I think that the acceptable use policy may need to be revised post-COVID,
Okay.
stylistically and other reasons. And so we can just do the COVID. There's nothing here that changes the way we do business. I was being over eager.
But whether it's a stylistic change or it's any change in these C policies, it all sunsets.
Yeah.
Okay.
We as a board would have to go back in or then re-adopt this as a non-C coded policy. Let's say we've loved this style and all.
Yeah.
We would have to re-adopt it and remove the C and have it repeal and replace our own.
Yeah, what I was getting at is the non-COVID related stylistic, a blue color. When these sunset and we liked it, we could at that point know which. Again, I'm not.
So there will be other changes that we might want to consider for this policy. So I think it would be better either to leave them red or I can get rid of the stylistic ones to not confuse things going forward.
Let's, if anything, delete the stylistic or have that just be tense and let's leave COVID related. Other questions on this policy? Mr. Maroney.
So if I understand correctly, the policy, the correction, the red is new and it will expire in June. So why would we have the students physically present in school property section expire? Shouldn't we have that, and B, why is it expired?
So as Mr. Burke explained last meeting, the state is asking us to consider a C series of policies. Their own language is that all C series expires. We can then choose to adopt, but that's the environment we're living under. We wouldn't necessarily adopt now. We could, but no matter any policy with a C next to it automatically expires. So what you don't want to do is have two competing policies. Right now, the C policies will trump, and in the end of July, they'll go. Further questions? Okay.
Sorry.
Do you have your hand up?
Yep. Thank you so much. Just one more time, Marge, on the question of kids who might bring devices in, where it says, you know, when students are physically present on school property, the board is pleased to offer students access to the district's computers and computer networks. But if they are using their own, are they able to get onto our networks? It was my understanding that there are still some students who do bring their own devices. And if so, are they covered under this policy?
Yes, because it talks about using our internet as well. Even so, if they're physically present in school, it not only covers devices that we provide, but that our internet as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Burke, next policy.
All right, next up, revisions to policy 5130-C-19, student attendance truancy and chronic absenteeism. Again, this is a COVID-related policy. The changes here are evident. The policy committee on reviewing them did not have any particular questions or issues, but while we're here in front of the board, you're free to ask.
Any questions? Jill, Ms. McCammon.
Thank you. How does this relate to our, where we have listed that if you have 10 unexcused absences, how are we reconciling quarantining kids who may have to be out for a short period of time while they assess what's happening, who might be more aggressive about it, from a policy perspective, because we do have some of that language in our policies.
So if you see at the end of the policy, it talks about that the board will follow future guidance from the state on attendance. So I think that Shipman and Goodwin understands that the policy on attendance, the guidance on attendance from the state is going to be fluid. And at the time they actually drafted this model policy, there was no guidance from the state. So, I know that Chris can explain how we're doing it, but that last paragraph is sort of a catch-all for what the state continues to give us as guidance.
Also under, in the policy, under number 1B, it talks about what would need to happen and what would be considered excused, and that includes student illnesses verified by appropriate licensed medical professionals. So COVID, I believe, would fall into that. And it contemplates that schools may make exceptions to that truancy issue of 10 absences.
So to that end, have we set something up procedurally that's any different in place to account for that, so that we don't end up with truancy that isn't truly truancy, that's just responsibly being absent?
Well, if you're responsibly absent under the policy, you're not going to be in a truant situation. If you have a medically supported reason for not being
right,
in
but
class,
once
you could never be truant.
Once you pass the threshold of 10, you then have to document any future absences with a doctor, correct? So I just want to make sure that because we have it at this level in the policy, that we also make sure that we're consistent across.
I believe, I don't know if Alicia's still on, but I believe they trigger something in the system so you're not counted as an absence once you're out for COVID purposes.
Yes, we have students move from an in-person learner and they're marked as a remote learner.
So you won't get I mean, I can speak, my son's quarantining. I haven't gotten the phone calls that I normally get when he's in school that he's missing classes. So I know he's not marked as absent. I don't know in other schools, but I know at the high school, they're not counted as absent.
So for a student who is on a school-sanctioned quarantine, they're marked as remote learners and then marked virtually present for their classes throughout the day.
VP.
That's it.
Yeah.
So if we have a kid who has a cold 11 times in the year and has to be out 11 days, is there also a process for that? And again, I'm sorry to ask at this level, but I know we have a lot of it in the policy. So I want to make sure that the procedures are in place.
So that is the same as each year when we have kids who are out 11 days with a cold? And this policy doesn't alter our regular understanding of that. But Mr. Turnberg, if you'd like to speak to how that actually happens operationally, please.
No, I was going to echo that same sentiment that it's nothing else has changed according to the law of attendance, but schools always have the procedures of how they monitor. But even if the absence is forgiven, so to speak, so this usually plays out in high schools with loss of credit. So even if the student's credit is restored, it doesn't necessarily affect our reporting for chronic absenteeism. So that's where it would still, chronic absenteeism remains the same by definition.
Mrs. Klein.
I believe Alicia wanted to comment.
Oh, on the screen. Alicia or Mrs. Kusuchi.
Oh, I think that Mr. Tranberg covered it.
Okay.
But we do keep notes of kids that are out and when we speak with them. So if there's ever a question, the nurses can help determine why a student is out. So if they're out 11 separate times for a cold, they would not be considered chronically absent. But if they then went on vacation for 5 days, that would maybe trigger something else. Does that make sense?
Any other questions on policy 5130 of C19? Okay. Can we,
Moving on
Mr. Burke, policy 1250.
1250-C19 is related to volunteer student interns and other non-employees. This really just makes them subject to the health and safety protocols already in place in the school if they are coming in to perform their volunteer activities. And again, this went through by the committee without additional comment.
Okay. There are additional questions now. Mr. Brown.
Quick question, Ms. Simon. And I apologize, I'm my own technological problem at the moment, so I can't give you the exact quote, but we have language in here discussing PII, personally identifiable information. And I just want to know if we have a definition or an explanation of what that is, because I'm not sure that always means the same thing to the same people, or is legally defined the same.
So there is no definition in this policy, but when people come into the building, they are given some FERPA training so that they understand.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on the revision to this policy? Okay, we'll move on to policy 1225. Mr. Burke.
All right, and again, this just makes the health policies related, make them subject to school visitors. Was discussed at the committee level with no particular issue or question.
So Mr. Burke, can I just point out that the language in paragraphs 8 and 9, that's not only COVID related, because that addresses the personally identifiable information. I think that it should be there, and then we can come and revise it. But that was one of the changes that I felt uncomfortable bringing a policy forward without that in there. We do it, but it should be noticed to everyone.
So that would have to be something after this expires in June, we would have to then revisit the policy and approve it formally. Thank you.
You got a note of that.
I do. I do.
Awesome, 'cause I'll
Yeah.
do that.
No, I wouldn't, unless I write it down.
Well, my recommendation to the board would be in July to revisit all the C19s, but we can deal with that then.
Is there,
Policy, Mrs. McCammon.
in preparation for the next meeting, is there a way to perhaps to have two separate votes so that we can first amend the policy and then amend the C version? Just thinking ahead, if there's another way to get that memorialized before, without having to remember in 6 months' time or at a year's time.
I think it's going to be up to Mrs. Simon and Mr. Burke, because you won't have two competing policies. This policy will be the policy, so you have to kind of go with whatever's in this one. You won't have two, right? You won't have the C19 and the regular. You will only have C19 for this year.
I agree. So I was thinking we could revise the regular and then you could adopt C19 separately.
Make a motion to revise the policy permanently and then a motion to revise it pursuant to COVID. Is that my?
Yes.
It's a little, sure.
I thought all this would sunset automatically in June, so don't we go back to as written? So we won't be modifying the C policies, we'll be making modifications prior, whereas in existence now, correct?
Yes.
Right.
So the point is the current policies, the C series will supersede them until June 30th. And then starting in July, all our policies will revert. If the board wants to change policy and then adopt different policy, we can do that. To me, it seems a little more complicated, but I'm happy to go with the will of the board.
Or you could do, sorry.
Well, my thought would be like, I think and Mr. Burke and Mr. Sion, the intent was these Cs are necessary for COVID, see how they work for your schools, and then decide what you want to adopt out of them or not. It might be premature to adopt without seeing how they actually play out over a school year would be my individual thought, but I'm happy to go with the will of the board.
But by operation.
Well, the board, what you'll do though, is that you'll have a choice in and around June 30th. This policy will expire. The board may determine that we're still in such an environment that the C policies, some of them, some, not all, or combination, will need to be replaced. Or to be readmitted. If the policy drops and the policy that goes back into place is somehow deficient in any particular language, and we discover that at any point, when that policy expires, you would amend the existing policy, which would go back into place, like in regular order, as we have done a number of times when we revise policies. We don't usually replace them, we usually revise them. So these are C policies that will expire on the 19th. So at the end of June. So if you want to, or you believe you need to change the underlying language and the policies that will come back up, you can certainly do it at that time. But I think to do it now within a C policy and have it come back and that will always stay will be burdensome and confusing. And let's remember that ultimately our community, our parents, are going to have to be able to see and understand these policies and understand how they work. So I think the more direct we can be in terms of creating these policies with a firm deadline and action taken, the better off probably for our parent community.
So just to follow up, and I apologize for going through this in such detail at this hour, but I've had a number of questions from people in the community as to whether these sunset, whether they go away, whether it's automatic by operation of the state policy or we adopt here, or whether there has to be some action. So just to confirm, I think we might have the same understanding, Mike, is that if before June 30th, we as a board decide we're going to adopt these policies or a portion thereof permanently, these will become our new policies.
Not necessarily permanently. You could vote to just extend them.
Extend for
You could say for another school year. You could say for whatever the board's desire is in their province.
Yeah.
But
So if we get to July 1st and we haven't taken any of it, but we want to make some changes, then we're going back to the policy pre-C, and that would be what we would take action on.
as we said last time, as we said earlier today, as we said at the committee meeting on the 23rd, these policies expire on June 30th if there is no action.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Sure.
So we're going to move on to policy 1225, C19, community board relations. Any questions on this? Oh, did I just do that?
So I'm
one?
sorry,
I forgot to flip. 1200.
1200 use
school
of
facilities.
right, school facilities. Again, this policy relates to the superintendent's authority to admit or deny access to the use of school fields. It's in accord with his present practice. There wasn't great discussion at the committee level at this. If there are questions, obviously, now we can address them and vote on them at the next meeting.
Question. Mrs. McCammon.
March or Alan, would you just spend a minute talking about that phrase with guidance of the different levels of health agencies? What does that mean to you?
Actually, I can speak to that, Jill. We discussed that at the meeting. So It's within the superintendent's authority under this policy to review the federal, state, and local statutes and guidance related to use of fields. We discussed the idea that there could be conflict at varying points between what the federal government, the state government, or local government might say in this COVID environment. And this policy gives the superintendent to proceed as he feels is most judicious and consistent with all of those mandates.
Which again, models current practice and really the understanding of care, custody, and control of schools.
Correct.
Does that answer your question, Joe? Any other questions on this policy? Okay, we will move forward on policy 5220.
All right, so 5220 is a remove and replace of the disciplinary, student disciplinary rules. As you can see, it was fairly extensive, and you'll note that this is not a C policy, so this will remain without action. There are items in here that relate to COVID, and in discussion with Marge, it was felt it would be too confusing and too laborious to just change the student discipline policy for COVID purposes. So there are items here that relate to COVID, but there are also language changes and recommended changes that came from Shipman and Goodwin. And it was discussed at the committee level, and it was felt that this policy in particular would probably be merit the board taking an extra long look before voting on.
Okay, questions on policy 5220? Okay, 1 second. Thank you. Mike, can you talk about, since there are no questions, but the policy committee thought this needed a second look, is there any, where was the second look that the committee, where were the issues?
The committee didn't have particular issues that popped up. The other members here can speak to that, but it was a feeling that the policy was of such length that and it was a remove and replace and not subject to the sunset clause, that it might be something that the board would want to take extra time to look at.
So it is dated, it has a C19 designation at the top of it? The new one?
Right, so there are provisions that are COVID provisions that should sunset, but we can do the same thing that we did, and we can keep this policy as a C19, and as Mr. Burke said, go back in July and adopt them. But there have been significant changes to the law since we revised this policy. It's what we're doing in school. We have no choice. So it didn't seem transparent to put up all of those old, you can no longer, under very rare circumstances, for example, expel a student who's PK through 2. We didn't have that in our policy. We're not doing it because it's against the law. So that's, we could do the same thing with this. And I did try to overlay Shipman and Goodwin's policy on this, but the whole policy was red. So you couldn't really see what the changes. That's why we tried to highlight them in the memo.
So then what I would do is maybe what Mr. Sini asked on the other policy, let's highlight what we think are statutory changes and one color, and let's do COVID another color, because I think if we're really repealing and replacing, in this instance, that's going to be an important designation for us. Other questions? Mrs. McCammon.
Or whoever, we have in there now that we're the virtual classroom, so a student learning from home is subject to discipline. From a procedural perspective, how does that work? How do you prove? I think there might be something such if it were witnessed by another student, but if it's just a teacher and a student, can you just talk a little bit about how disciplining someone in a virtual environment works and looks?
I don't know whether I don't know, Alan, whether you want to discuss that or.
Yeah, I think of it, well, again, this reasonable clause, right? I think you'd have to be, I think you know when you see it in terms of if you're being abusive, if you're using the technology inappropriately. I still think that those standards of personal conduct and so on would still apply. Look, I think we're in this situation, we're always going to be reasonable, but we certainly have standards of behavior that any of us around this table, if they were compromised, would know it when they see it in terms of you can't bully people, you can't be disrespectful to people, you can't use inappropriate language, pictures, or otherwise, right? So all of those things would still apply, and as if, for the most part, as if you were in the school setting, for the most part.
Thank you.
Any further questions on this policy?
Could I just take a minute? Mr. Deneen had asked a question about the definition of a firearm. If you notice, an antique gun is excluded from the definition of a firearm. That tracks the federal statute, and also the Connecticut statute on mandatory expulsion excludes an antique firearm. But an antique firearm would be covered under the definition of a deadly weapon or a dangerous instrument. So if someone brought in an antique firearm that could actually fire, they would still be subject to discipline. Thank you.
Okay, so Mr. Burke, anything else on these?
That was it that the committee considered.
Okay, we will look forward to action next meeting.
I just wanted to say thank you both to Marge and to Mike and the committee for all your hard work. There's a lot going on right now, and I truly appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, the C19 series is keeping me very busy this year. Thank you both. We'll move on to action items, and we have a PAR. I think we need to, I need to entertain a motion to amend the date. I think it says October 13th, but if we could amend it to tonight's meeting, I need a motion to amend the PAR to Tuesday, October 27th. Mrs. Ritchie is getting the first because she actually caught that. And Mr. Burke will second. All in favor? That is unanimous. May I have a motion to approve the PAR as dated Tuesday, October 27, 2020? Mr. Maroney so moves. Mr. Burke's the only one with his hand up, so he gets to second again. All in favor? And that is unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Is there any public comment this evening?
Would you like me to read the instructions?
Yes, please.
Good evening. If you would like to speak during public comment, please click the participants icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Next, click the raise hand option. You will notice a blue hand icon appear in the upper corner of your screen where your face, name, and/or number appears. When it is your turn to speak, the facilitator will identify you and announce that you are unmuted for public comments. Once recognized and unmuted, please state your name and address. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment. There are no raised hands at this time.
Thank you. May I entertain a motion to adjourn? Mr. Sini so moves, Mr. Maroney seconds, all in favor. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.